I'm all a little bit organized today, at least not overly that, but not in a boring way. But I got some slides to help us along. Thank you, Janine. I like that. Is it just me or does everyone get excited for these webinars? Everyone who's anyone gets excited for these webinars, Janine. If you're not excited, you're just not a VIP. Hey, John. How you doing? Hey, Jennifer and Brian. OMG family. I like that. Hey, Shabna. How you doing? Feeling great energy tonight. I appreciate it. This is nice. You guys are so nice today. Not sorry, you always, but this intro is particularly energetic. I like it. It helps me. My preparation, my theoretical energy is great, but my actual energy was maybe about medium, and so this is really really great. I'm not down to the dumps in the least. I'm great. I just mean in terms of really particularly get me going with what you guys are saying. I appreciate it. So let's see here. Hola, Maria. How you doing? To see translation, Facebook gives me the opportunity to translate Hola. I think we can probably guess what that means. My son certainly knows. He's fluent in Spanish, crazily enough. James Clark. Hi, David. Unstuck formula. Here we go. Awesome. As we get started here, why don't I quickly address Christian's question here in a way that is relevant to other stuff, but I wanted to mention anyway. Christian says, David, can we real quick get some tips for studying in school? Since he meant to say accelerated learning. And of course, this is relevant for learning SEO and learning in general, right? And helping our kids learn and all sorts of stuff. And again, this will relate even more, but I thought I would say one thing that could be helpful here. Hey, Bryce, fired up. When it comes to Crushing the Game, I'm going to be a personal pilgrim. I love it. Okay. I have on the slide here for learning. I just wrote this after reading his question. I wrote that a real key for learning that'll help you constantly throughout your life. I have a different slide where I'm going to point out how we can not really worry about our mindset. Mindset's more either a part of the puzzle or more of a symptom of our framework, right? So if we know to go for a particular framework, then the rest will follow generally. And what I wrote, and I'll give a little bit of illustration of what I mean here with learning. I say, and of course, I've said similar things to this in the past, but if you can listen to the same webinar 4 or 5 times, and you can listen to me say something similar differently as well. So I was thinking, if I ever worry about repeating myself, but I think about that, how people listen to webinars multiple times, a new one every time. So I don't worry about it. So I wrote, go for a growing and sticky framework rather than closure. And this is a similar pattern. This is even a similar pattern to how for success, you want to go for breaking bottlenecks in addition to when you're stuck on like an island or a peak where you're running in circles or making progress and having to sabotage or like with money, where in order for people to feel progress with money, they have to like just come up with ways to spend it in order to feel great about making more of it. If that's where they're in that way, right? They're peaked out in their life with making money. And so they don't really need more necessarily. They find a way to need more so they can keep feeling that feeling of progress. But instead, we can understand how to make actual progress. That we don't have to find ways to make like fake progress or to invisibly set ourselves back. So then we get to make progress by running in circles or feel like we are. But I say all that as a parallel to this framework versus closure thing is a similar thing that people do incorrectly is they'll go for like the feeling of progress rather than breaking bottleneck, like I said, right? If you focus on not getting stuck, then you will succeed, right? Including one of the first things you need to do to not be stuck is to get your ideal straight, right? What are you aiming for? Or and you might not. One of the things you want to get more and more practiced at is so often you're going to ask a question like, what do I ideally want regarding a particular topic? What do I really want? Like money or something, clients or whatever. You're going to ask yourself a question and you need to get more and more used to, I might even ask you guys how you feel like you're doing with this right now. So if you come across a question and it might be, what do I want in a significant other? It might be, how much money do I want to make? Or what do I want to do to make progress with getting clients or anything like that? So you have that question, and what we tend to want is closure, because in one sense, by logic, we want what we want. We want our ideal. I get that. But if we look at it with learning, someone might be needing to learn chapter 4 in their chemistry textbook. And what will actually make someone learn much more slowly and effectively is if, like we just stated what they want, which is in one sense, at least there's some vagueness to it, but there's some specificity to it, right? They want to learn chapter 4 of the chemistry book. A couple of things. One is they can hone in even better on what it means to learn, right? Maybe they might understand they want to get the best possible score or 100% on a test, right? Ideally. And therefore, it's not exactly about learning it or not in a vague sense, but in that they want to learn what they need to do well on the test. That gets a bit more specific. But even separate from that, so even if you were to hone exactly what you need, like what you mean by I want to learn chapter 4 of my chemistry book text, there's a way that your mind will tend to want to make essentially the full frontal assault, or at least just see progress constantly. And what that'll mean is that someone will just start reading and they'll want to feel like they're digesting, understanding, and memorizing what they're reading as they're going. And if they don't feel a sense of closure, they feel like they're not doing it right. But let's contrast that with if they were to approach learning by going for a growing and sticky framework, then they might scan over the chapter first, get a sense of the organization of it. They might look at the questions at the end of the chapter. There might be questions there that one could answer if one had read it, right? Often people instinctually don't read the questions first because all that does is give them less of a sense of closure. They're reading questions that they don't know the answer to. And doesn't matter if of course, nearly all of us are not in school. Everything I'm talking about is a great illustration for exactly what you are doing in life, right? So I think you get that. But this is it. Well, this is what I'm saying is correct about learning a textbook, but it's also going to illustrate from a couple of different angles the general way that you want to approach life and how it's counterintuitive. So reading questions that you don't know the answer to at the end of a chemistry chapter is normally not something that people do because, again, it feels like they have less closure now, right? They have more questions. And questions feel like work in a sense, like you feel like you want the answer to it, right, to some degree. Or you just feel more inadequate or more incompetent because there's more stuff you don't know the answer to. However, if you were going for a growing and sticky framework, did you make progress with that by reading the questions at the end of the chapter, reading about what things you're going to be able to answer, or the kind of point of reading the chapter, right? Is this be able to answer these questions in a sense? At least it's certainly from the author's point of view and so forth. So it gives them a sense of what they're getting at. If I happen to, and might be better if I did, and maybe I'll be able to do this to some degree in the future. If I were to say at the end of this webinar, you'll be able to answer a few of these questions, the following 3 questions. Now, the only problem with me doing that is that it can give you a false sense of closure at the end if you can give the keyword answers to those questions, but if you didn't really understand it in the right way. So the drawback to me doing that, and probably why I instinctually don't do exactly that, is because with this topic in particular, it's not necessarily something where being able to answer it by completing a sentence or something, right? Or if I said before this webinar or at the end of this webinar, you'll be able to answer the key to motivation is what? And then at the end of the webinar, you might be able to insert a phrase there that's new from what I talked about today. But that new phrase might give your mind the wrong sense of closure where it stops thinking about it. A little bit like I talked about in relationships. If someone gets the wrong type of closure where the woman feels like she has the guy figured out, then she might feel bored. And so she also might not, depending on where she is in her development and maturity. And so, but at least you could picture that, how closure can sometimes work against us. And at least if we don't have closure, our mind tends to be working on it. When we differentiate ourselves and our brain, then we can have a concept of learning where we want our brain to be hungry and to have this sticky ends to its framework, these open like spaces where it's trying to figure out the answers. Our brain's going to give us the emotion, oh, I want to know what that is now. But if you can sometimes conceptually differentiate yourself from your brain, then if your brain feels hungry for the knowledge in chapter 4 of the chemistry book, then you're like, great, that's how I want it to feel. I'm not my brain. I'm not hungry. I want it to want the answers because then one of the issues that's going on in learning is that there's so much information that our mind and brain potentially has available to it, not even just theoretically on the internet, but just visually and everything. Even or when you're reading something, it needs to know its question is constantly what's important. And by creating the right framework, then what you want to do is create a context where the stuff that you are going to want it to remember and retrieve later is important. It's seems important to your brain, right? Feels important. That is metaphorical to in your day-to-day career and success in life. You want the priorities that you want to have, the things you want to be working on and focusing on and doing and putting resources into to feel important to you, right? So it's very parallel to learning. I got a little bit lucky with the things that I was working on in my 20s. Various topics of interest to me were like evolution, learning, and things like that, evolution versus creation and so forth, God's existence, things like that, ended up being a bit of a perfect storm for figuring out like fundamentally about life. Mm. And there's success literature and so forth too, like neurolinguistic programming, Think and Go Rich. Those are different things, but that kind of genre, Tony Robbins, Dale Carnegie, and so forth. Napoleon Hill, of course, with Think and Go Rich. Okay. So we're talking about a number of similar things here where our mind wants closure and it wants an appearance of progress, but instead will actually, when we can differentiate ourselves from our mind, we can realize that, yeah, we wanted feeling like I talked about in the past, embracing confusion in some cases, right? If you were to scan over chapter 4 of this chemistry book and feel a sense of confusion about some things, like you weren't getting it all for sure, or even if you were reading at a normal pace and it wasn't all making sense, if you realize to look at things the right way, and again, this is metaphorical to success in general and your career. And if you look at success the right way, you like your brain feeling like, oh, I don't get all this right now. I don't fully understand this. Normally people react the wrong way to that and they feel like something's wrong because they're not feeling a direct, immediate sense of progress, right? And the only place they can look for knowledge is this feeling, right? So they're trapped by what their brain already thinks is correct, essentially. But if you were to keep reading through the chapter, even if you didn't feel like you were understanding it, it turns out that is going to be giving you a growing and open sticky ends in your framework, things you don't quite know, but you have a sense of now what it is you're looking for, right? You're going to be, a whole lot is going to get both absorbed and built, and then questions will come up too. If you were to read through a chemistry chapter, even if you don't feel like you got everything or even a lot of what it was saying. Again, as a matter of fact, if you felt a sense that it all made sense the whole time, you might even get to the test and realize, whoa, actually, I thought it made sense, but now I'm being asked these test questions and I can't adjust to little twists and turns that the professor's giving me. So that's what you want to focus on when it comes to learning. In terms of actual practice, that might look like reading the questions at the end of the chapter. It might be skimming over the chapter. It might just mean reading it through at a normal pace, even if you feel like you need to slow down and reread the same sentence over and over again. Just don't. It's not going to necessarily kill you, but it's inefficient compared to going on. Your mind will automatically build a framework. If it feels hungry, like doesn't have closure, if it feels a bit confused, that's actually, you can actually reframe that, understand or come to understand that that's what your brain is, the signal your brain's going to give you when it is having to build a new framework. And that is what you need to do to learn. And so it's actually the right process. It's all happening just fine. And as a practical matter, when you sleep, there's additional things that happen. And so good to break up your studying and then be able to sleep at some point after, between when you read through it once and then read through it some more or work on it some more or go to actually answer the questions or something. So try to give yourself multiple days for material. Then see if you have multiple days, you can read through at a normal or even quick pace and then just be done. Let it go and then come back to it the next day. And then you might just be able to read through it, double the rate, normal rate, and really get it, double the rate and really understand, because like magic, your mind has much more of a framework and things are very different. There's a way that we don't intuitively feel like a new framework is going to get built. If we hear Greg talk about SEO and it doesn't immediately make sense because we don't have the framework for it, let's say, or anyway, I just pick Greg at random. But what people will do is often react, and I don't have any instances where someone's reacted negatively to Greg specifically, but just, of course, it can be the case when someone first encounters search engine optimization training, that especially if it's not particularly geared, if it's in the middle of things, right? If someone were to watch a webinar in the middle of things and watch Greg answer questions without really having a great understanding of it yet, then if they didn't understand learning well, then they might say, oh, I felt confused. I didn't know what was going on. and so forth. And people feel like something's wrong when they don't have a framework. And they also feel like there's a way that we don't intuitively feel like we're making progress, right? Like as if the only progress that we feel is when an existing framework has a kind of a question and that gets answered, right? But the beginning of building a framework basically it feels like negative progress to people intuitively, at least to some degree, and at least until it gets significantly reframed through experience and like through understanding experience and so forth. The more this is so parallel to the general overall success formula where you're building context on your side, you're building vectors on your side, you're understanding context, what vectors and what factors are important. And you're getting a sense of where you are now, right? What you're like, if you were to go try doing a sales presentation about doing SEO consulting to someone, there's a way that without knowing what I'm saying, people would be going, hoping that it would work rather than realizing that no matter what, it's going to help them start to build a framework for what will work. And as you embrace this building of a framework part that has to come before great success, when that doesn't feel like you're stuck and when you don't need to shy away from it, then that's a huge block that's lifted from massive success in your life, right? It shrinks people or keeps them down in so many ways when they don't realize that there's a lot of success happening or a lot of progress, I should say, happening when a framework is being built, when the stickiness is being built, not just when something is getting put into the sticky part of the frame, the question's being answered, so to speak. And life becomes so easy when you embrace the need for and the ability to and for when it just feels right to not really know what's going on, but because you're not what I started giving you last time, which was even a summary of things I've talked about in the past. I'm giving you this is what I'm about to say now is pretty nice. I'm giving you the biggest box. So you actually never need to operate outside of the box ever again in one sense because you have the overall box, the slide I had last time, or was it here? And I think I'll advance our understanding of what I meant by consciousness field significantly today in a way that you'll like. I think that was probably one of the most nebulous things last time. One of the kind of things was probably a bit vague, but this overall is going to give you the basis for your knowledge, is your foothold. The process that you're going to go through and when I talked about not making that full frontal assault, not needing closure right off the bat, instead, the process for planning, for gaining knowledge, for figuring out what you're going to do next, what your priority should be, right? That kind of invisible, like that's half invisible navigation that you hardly realize you're doing into the future, right? It's like you're walking through the future, trying not to bump into things and trying to get good stuff, like figure out what's good and figure out how to get there. That whole process is thinking, planning, deciding, representing in your mind. If you get that right, everything else you want and do in life flows from that. Again, this is your overall box. And our instincts about doing that will tend to be wrong. And it's the same it's same as I'm illustrating with the learning. Our instinct will be we want to answer the question, but we don't want to build the question or we don't want to shave off parts of the gray, right? That are wrong. But that is how we do it in working with our brains. Our mind will be looking around in the gray area, like I've talked about. Our mind will look for the answer to the question. That's fine. Just there's not a problem when you're learning. Getting the answer to a question you have is great. And your mind will do that. Your mind's great at that, right? At the point where you have a framework for chemistry textbook chapter 4, and the point where you have a framework, including a bunch of questions about what certain formulas mean or what this new term means, right? What is electronegativity? What does that mean? At the point where you have that, your mind is naturally good at getting the answers to, given that it's possible, right? If the answers can be all found within that chapter, especially, of course, even if it's not, you can Google it, ask somebody, etc. So that's downhill, right? It's easy. In other words, it's naturally no problem for our mind to get answers. What we need to help our mind with is with building the sticky framework, the growing and sticky framework, that part. So we don't need to of course, we're not preventing our mind from the easy part, but the point is the easy part is the easy part. And the other part isn't even hard. It's just hard when you understand wrong. And it's hard by default for people to realize how to learn properly or to go about success properly or to go about planning and deciding and knowledge, right? Knowing, planning, deciding, those are all the same type of thing. Those are hard for people to get right because they don't realize to build the context right, to build that the growing the framework is what matters. People don't realize that when they go into a sales presentation, it's not about succeeding right off the bat. It's not about the closure. It's about, or going into dating, going into a date. It's not about having it, getting the result that we're supposedly going for. It's a two-part process that starts with growing the framework. Once you understand and embrace that in life, then life gets so easy. It's that part that's missing from people's awareness and strategy. It kind of constantly feels wrong until it doesn't. But by default, it does. And the evidence is all over the place. Again, when you watch someone dating, they want to see that result. If someone goes and buys a course, they're like, oh, this course is going to give you the exact instructions and I'm going to follow it. The guy that made the course, they're doing it and they're going to show me how to run paid ads and how to do affiliate marketing and how to make some money. I'm going to see money hit my bank account right away. That could happen. I'm not even describing a scam, but I'm describing something that is missing half of the process, that the half that's going to guarantee your success, which is the growing the framework part, right? If you look at how people think by default, they want to see the result. They want to see the castle get taken or whatever. But if they want to take over a castle, right? Invade a castle, siege it, they want to see their army growing. They want to see more and better weapons. They want to see advantages, right? But what's the first thing you need to do if you're going to take over a castle is you need to get a sense of where the bottlenecks are and not just like the front gate, right? The bottleneck might be the people's morale, which might have to do with their shoes, right? But you might not know that if you don't look for it, right? It's not right there shining in glory in an obvious thing. And it's the stopping and looking for what, that'll make you figure out morale, which makes you figure out the right footgear, the right food. Or like I've talked about in the past, maybe you need to go all the way back to a town 100 miles away and build some new siege weaponry. If you bring that up, suggest that, might get run out of that battle camp, right, as being a negative thinker. But if they're right, then they're brilliant, right? It's exactly right. And before we can know if that guy's right, you need a framework. You need a sense of where the bottlenecks are, right? That guy's right if that'll overcome the bottleneck. If that's not the bottleneck, going back 100 miles to a town where you can build a better siege engine, then you don't need to do that. And that all means that the issue is understanding what the bottlenecks are to start with. But people don't look for what the bottlenecks are. They look for what's the thing that's going to make them apparent progress, right? Without when someone's excited and they just met someone and they started dating somebody, listen to what they say. Or of course you can easily imagine this. That's why I'm using it as an example. They're not talking about how what's so exciting about this last few days is that they clearly have a workable system with the other person where they can work through when things don't work out well. Like when they start running into an issue with their relationship, that they have a way to get through it that's going to be reliable and that they both understand. That's typically not what they're gushing. But if it's not, then that's proof. It's an example of, but it's proof in a sense. It's not just evidence, because that is the bottleneck in a relationship generally, is dealing with, there's kind of two main bottlenecks in a relationship. One is an overall kind of lack of motivation, where people don't quite like each other enough. Like they meet in circumstances where they like each other relative to whoever else is around and what's going on. Maybe they're on vacation. Maybe they're whatever, this, that, or the other thing is going on. Maybe they're in high school and then they like each other fine for both being in high school. But if they both go off to college in different towns, they don't like each other enough to want to stick to that. They don't have the motivation for that. Without thinking about it, they think they do. But then right around Thanksgiving time, first year in college, 99, I think almost literally like 99% of people seem to break up, right? With their high school person they went to the prom with or whatever. In that case, they lack the motivation. It's not a fight that causes it, right? It's they didn't have the motivation to overcome less perfect circumstance, right? But you marry someone, then at some point you're going to hit less than perfect circumstances. So you've got to be very motivated. Everything I'm talking about is illustrating the same concept of the mind going for the seeming progress, and not looking for bottlenecks. Okay, so I'm just illustrating this with a little bit of an extended illustration with relationships. So one of the bottlenecks or places where a relationship is going to get stuck is lack of motivation. Another example of lack of motivation is, suppose here's a common pattern. Suppose a guy finds a girl really attractive, and the girl could take or leave the guy by default, but the guy, because he's motivated, does all these things where the girl's okay, like I like this guy now. Because the guy's really motivated, he's acting motivated, and that takes the girl from a gray area to where she'll date the guy and genuinely like him pretty well. But then the guy is just less motivated. At some point over time, this strong sense of motivation goes away for whatever reason. But this happens consistently. He might theoretically be just as motivated, but he's used to now having her, so he doesn't feel as motivated because he doesn't see the difference. Or maybe some other girl who's attractive gets interested in him for some reason. Or whatever else. Maybe he's just stuff comes up with work or a hobby where it takes enough of his focus. Or maybe it's a day by day thing where after sex, he doesn't feel as motivated for half a day or whatever it might be. Or it's the morning, right? The girl's not made up as well and he's less motivated. It might be it turns out that they didn't quite like each other enough. And actually maybe the guy liked the girl enough, but the girl didn't like the guy enough in the sense that the relationship was only going to work if the guy was really motivated. And when the guy is just really motivated, where he doesn't want to break up with her, and he's happy to be in a relationship, he might even be faithful and everything, but he's not like super motivated. And then the girl feels like, oh, something's wrong, something's changed. But all it is, he has normal motivation, but not extreme motivation. And now she finds that she's not that into the relationship herself. What would happen if they're both really a great match for each other is that the times when one or the other isn't super motivated, the other one kind of ends up naturally making up for it. And the girl liking the guy. Of course, this can happen in reverse, but I just pick one, you know what I mean? I just pick one for the sake of illustration. It could happen with the genders reversed too. But it's sticking with my current example. If the girl likes the guy a lot, if it's a great match, then she doesn't need the guy to bend over backwards just to feel into him enough, right? Or she might be into him theoretically, but she's not that enthusiastic about being intimate with him, like enough, right? And then the guy gets like frustrated with that, right? All these things. But that's a real issue. But why isn't what I just said really clear common knowledge to people? I'm not saying nobody knows it in this case. I'm sure some people have figured it out, but it's not like very common that people are really very aware, right? You wouldn't have any sense of winning over the girl if people were aware. You would have a sense of looking for a match to create a great relationship. Like you win by creating a great relationship. That's different. You're always motivated to have a great relationship. But in terms of being motivated about the person specifically, it's a little bit different than I talk about with status and so on. It's not about a high value person. And there could even be days when the relationship doesn't feel like a priority, of course. But again, when they're both into each other, they'll carry through, right? They'll pick up the slack a little bit, or the girl won't dip into dangerous territory, or a guy, the roles are reversed. But where the guy's motivation isn't super high, I'm not saying either one dips to where they don't want to be dating, right? But just if it's a yeah. So that's one of the two major issues there. And I go into detail with this because sometimes delving into detail really helps illustrate what I mean by the whole idea of being stuck or bottlenecks or stuck on the wrong island and so forth. So they're stuck on the wrong island, right? If for a guy but a guy is stuck in this illustration, is stuck on the wrong island if fundamentally he thinks that dating is about finding a girl who could like him and earning her. You earn a relationship by creating it, but you don't earn a person by doing all kinds of stuff to win them, right? You want to win, you create a great relationship. And to do that, you find someone else who wants to create a great relationship with you. Because of the match and the vision, the shared vision and the shared match. So the guy's on the wrong island, to illustrate what I meant by islands in the past, or to get further illustrate. If he thinks it's about winning the girl over, and he's going to keep running into the same problem where eventually he won't feel hyper motivated for the girl. And then she'll dip down back into that gray area where she's wondering why she's dating him. She feels like the magic is gone, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You want to start with magic in the match, and then you continually can clear out debris, get the train back on the rails. But it's a whole different thing to keep something where it's naturally headed than to unnaturally try and make it work. Does that make sense? Now that's going to be the same pattern with your own goal and stuff. And this will dovetail into when I talk about motivation and so forth. Fundamentally in life, you want it to be about clearing away blocks, obstacles, being unstuck, and riding. Life is naturally can be good, and you can naturally pursue goals that line up with how you can feel by default can all work for you. And you fundamentally just need to be unstuck on the way to. Okay, the other issue that you can that people would run into with relationships that also illustrates by seeing how people don't see what I'm about to say very commonly, then it further illustrates the truth that we need to see. I'm trying to make a case for you in addition to whatever else I'm saying, where you need to see how it's counterintuitive. If you don't see how it's counterintuitive, you won't take it seriously in the right way. Your mind has to see how it's different than how it would normally do things to go after looking for what gets you stuck rather than going after what seems to be a big advantage, right? So when people talk about why they're all excited about the relationship, they talk about their great feelings and the person did this and they're so funny and they're so smart and they're so good looking and, oh, they said this wonderful thing and we do this together and we have this in common, right? It's all advantage after advantage, or like with the closure, metaphorical to, oh, we have this great weapon for taking over the castle, this great weapon for this advantage, this reason, that reason. But it doesn't matter how many advantages you have. If there's a full block or there's bottlenecks or you're on the wrong island, right? If you're trying to get to Europe, it doesn't matter how fast you can drive or run. It doesn't matter how healthy you are, how great in shape, how long you've been training, how there's this wonderful supplement and this wonderful thing and that wonderful thing or this incredible car. You can't get there because you're on the wrong continent. And there's a whole ocean, not just continent. You're on the wrong island, right? There's a whole body of water between you and between like US and Asia or Europe, right? So purely thinking in terms of advantages will only get you there if you're lucky in the sense that you're already in Europe rather than America. And if we're talking about advantages that are things like how great a car you have or how great you can run. And this is fundamentally what people run into all the time in life. It's nonstop. When people think about, oh, chasing shiny objects when it comes to making money, that's a symptom, but it doesn't identify the root. The root is fundamentally the problem of looking for advantages rather than looking for what the problem of the bottleneck is. Now, sometimes the real thing holding you back is you don't have enough forward motion. And I gave a specific example of that with relationships where I said you need enough natural forward motion for both people in terms of liking each other and wanting a relationship with each other, right? So if forward motion is your bottleneck, fine. But you don't just assume that. What people do is they assume that. If you just need a better gun or a better weapon, and I even gave that example with a better siege engine, perhaps, to storm or take over a castle, right? If you imagine a medieval castle invasion, say, then that's what you need. So sometimes an advantage is the thing you need the final thing you need to break the final bottleneck or to break one of the bottlenecks on the way to your goal. But you start by figuring out what the blocks are, what the sticking points are. And that's when you know if you need a particular advantage. Like I say, when do you buy software? When you need it, right? When you know that's what you need to get ahead, then you get the software you need. But it's possible to accumulate however many advantages, right? An unlimited number of advantages and still not succeed. If you're like on the wrong island, like I said, right? It's possible to run and run in circles. It's possible to make money, spend it, and feel like you're kicking ass the whole way through and basically fail in life. But you can try to convince yourself that you're succeeding, but you're always going to feel it. You're always going to feel like something's wrong. And people do feel it. It's not just money. It's anything. Anything that doesn't involve a full win that you're going for in life where everyone's good. It's off. Everyone's well off. We get rid of the contradictions and so forth. Bad idea. The other issue with relationships, I mentioned this before, but it's that you're able to reach the other person and fundamentally be able to talk and deal with issues if they come up, where you are motivated enough by caring about the other person's point of view, how they feel. It doesn't mean you always do just what they want, right? But where both of you, not just you, but both of you are significantly motivated by the other person being happy. If my wife pulls out her iPhone and starts looking at it when we're walking with her and Chance and myself, my son and her, I don't just dislike that because, oh, shoot, now she's not available for me to talk to as well, or she's a little bit checked out. I like the fact that it's nice for her, right? Now, if it bleeds over into ways that are detrimental to our relationship fundamentally, if we're in bed or something and she's pulling on the iPhone constantly and it interferes with our intimacy, then to a significant degree where it doesn't happen, then that would be an issue we want to discuss, and we're good with that. But that's not an issue. But she does like her iPhone. I like my playing my games on my computer, right? My strategy games and so forth on my computer, role playing games. She's genuinely happy for me when I'm doing that, right? There's times that we spend together, like at night, we might watch a show on the computer on Netflix or something. And when she comes down at night after putting Chance to bed, then I turn off my game in almost every case, or literally every case, depending on the situation. Once in a blue moon, if there was some reason I really wanted to play, but then she'd be motivated by the fact I was happy, but I would be motivated by the fact that she would want to spend time together, and I would naturally too, right? The point is that you need to have motivation, how the other person feels, and be able to talk and communicate. And the end result of it needs to be that when there's like a mismatch with things that you guys might naturally, the ideal, no one's going to do what you want and want what you want all the time, or even most of the time, or even a lot of the time, right? And you've got to be able to relatively easily get through those times. And maybe when you talk, there's a few times it can get heated a little bit, this or that, but can you deal with it? And can you move through those times? And it doesn't necessarily mean compromise. There can be some compromise, but can you, one way or the other, work through it? And those are the two things that those are the main issues with relationships. If you get those two things straight, depending on how you want to classify it, maybe there's a third where you fundamentally need to understand in the terms of building a relationship and have a vision for a relationship, it's not an alliance between two people where you're both awesome in and of yourselves. You have to maintain your status to the outside world. Basically, if your relationship has anything to do with impressing other people, then that's another a problem. That's kind of a paradigm problem. That's also a big deal. So if you want to classify that, however you want to classify that, that's an issue. That's not really an issue between two people. It's something that both individuals need to separately understand and not get sucked into. I think that it's something that for the most part, you as an individual person, you can't control the other person, can mostly handle by not thinking that way yourself, not thinking of a relationship as something where it's about status to the outside world, and take an honest look at that, because by default, you are going to probably feel that way. If you haven't, you might have already figured that out and worked through it for whatever reason, but that's the meme out there. It's hidden. It's not put as starkly as I'm putting it, to impress parents, to basically, why would people care so much about having an equal status person in a lot of cases? Not everyone does, right? There's plenty of love stories where it's not about status, but why are those stories special? Why are they appealing? Right? It's because they illustrate doing things in a way that doesn't have that bottleneck that people feel. You could feel how it'll get you stuck when you look at it. If you need a person to be equal status, what's the issue with the kind of a well-known thing that sometimes occurs if the woman makes more money than the man? If you guys are focused on creating a relationship, it shouldn't matter. But if you're worried about status, then that's a problem, including to yourself, right? The status is also just like your own opinion of yourself and so forth. Okay, so I went on an extended example there to illustrate the fundamental concept about dealing with success as looking at getting unstuck. And the learning was a parallel to that. I'll talk about motivation in a second. I have something for you there. But this overall frame, and I believe I'll get to some bit about illustrating about consciousness field and what I mean by that, and how to use it, how to use what I mean. I think, yeah, it's one of the difficult things to get what I mean, partly because of how I explain it, and partly just because it's inherently not, you don't have the framework for it to start with. But when we understand that the greatest bottleneck is not having what's on this slide, that's your overall box. As you have this, then it could be particularly downhill. So like I've been talking about, breaking bottleneck doesn't tend, or getting on the right island doesn't feel sexy necessarily, at least by default. So this may or may not feel very sexy, what's on this slide, but it is sexy. It, it's so does it feel sexy? It's not, but it is. It is. You understand what I mean? It is awesome. You might never feel. You may or may not feel it, and so in that sense, it is sexy. So depending on how we interpret that, but it may feel irrelevant or not very helpful or not immediately helpful, but it's massively important and helpful. And what's this final thing is you need to have this safe knowledge that acts in one direction where you're not having to check how you feel about something if you can figure out that it has to be correct through a process that is accurate. That process is going to be different than the process your mind has already used to accumulate its current associations and ideas and beliefs and so forth that got absorbed starting when you were an infant and got absorbed from the outside world. That absorption process, including the learning process based off of it, does not lead to a perfect model of the world by any stretch of imagination. It actually leads to you being stuck on an island, so to speak, right? Fundamentally stuck where you're running and feeling like you're making progress and have all these advantages, and you're never going to get to Europe. If you're in America, you need to have a way to have knowledge that acts upon your mind and your actions. Not perfectly. It's not all powerful, but it doesn't get acted upon. You don't need to check and see if it's right through feeling. Doesn't mean you'll always act against your feeling. Doesn't mean you'll always act on what you supposedly know, but it does mean that there's a constant influence of what you've built properly that will gradually, sometimes quickly, sometimes gradually, affect your actions and affect your mind and your associations, your feelings, your habits, all that, beliefs. And then you'll feel it later. But it's the only way out, right? You see how you can't get out if you need to feel something is true in order to adopt it as true. Then you're stuck within the box that got built for you, starting from when you're an infant and got absorbed from everywhere. Learning only makes progress within the box. It doesn't get you from the United States to Europe if you try to walk or have a car. If you don't have a boat or somewhere to cross the ocean. Okay, excellent. Go to something related about motivation. All right, I switched slides here. So I wrote the real key to motivation. I haven't put the key on the slide, I'll say it, but it's going to be our main idea we're talking about here. The real key to motivation, but this just occurred to me, how in a particularly clear way, but it's something I've used all along, but I didn't realize it as clearly. The real key to motivation, I wrote, using what your brain is really most scared of. So what is it where do all negative feelings come, somewhat ironically, from your mind and your brain getting stuck, right? Frustration comes, I've gone through this. Frustration comes when you're going after a goal and you feel like there's an obstacle that shouldn't be there. It wasn't expected. Just feels unnatural, right? There's some natural obstacles like the distance it takes to drive somewhere that don't frustrate you, right? If you're going to Starbucks, I've used this example in the past. If you know that it's 5 minutes away by car, you don't get frustrated that it's not 1 minute away. You just hop in your car, go there. You don't feel frustrated. If there's an unnatural obstacle on the way to your Starbucks, then you might feel frustrated, like there's unnatural traffic or something. If we feel like through negligence or intent, somebody put something in our way that gets us stuck on the way to something we want, then what will we feel? Anger. But the operative word there is stuck. Once again, stuck leads to a negative emotion. The rest of the context, the rest of the ingredients determine the type of emotion. Frustration, if it's an obstacle, but it wasn't put there by a person, but through negligence or intention, then you feel frustrated. If you feel like a person did it, including sometimes yourself, you can feel angry at yourself rather than frustrated. If you feel like it through neglect, typically, right, that you should have done something differently and damn, you put an unnatural obstacle in your path. It's just a recipe. Once I realized the recipe, I stopped letting the recipe come together. The recipe for negative emotions is a little bit like a traffic accident where it takes like a few factors, right? Like it almost takes the conditions like being in place, right? When you stop making plans and you start where plan A has to work, right? Like you can instead of making a plan to go get coffee and like your plan is for plan A to succeed, then you make a plan to go after getting coffee. But if something pops up, then you realize that you adjust to it. And naturally worked into all my planning these days is the obvious idea once you realize it, that if there's an unnatural obstacle, then you adjust to that. Like it changes, like your plan isn't for plan A to succeed. You're pretty much always going after plan A in order to see if there's an obstacle that you couldn't see before that. You would drive to Starbucks. You don't have to even think that constantly. After a while, it becomes a habit. You're driving, and what that means is you're going to see if there's any obstacles on the way to Starbucks. And if not, you'll get the coffee. If there is, then you adjust to the obstacle. No, I don't say those words to my head. I don't like hop in my car and say, I'm now driving to Starbucks to see if there's obstacles. But then if there's an obstacle, I instinctively revert to that. My brain does it for me naturally at this point in almost every case. Like it's pretty consistent now. I don't really feel a lot of anger or frustration. The property rights thing is the closest I'll get, but I mostly keep myself just from staring at that stuff. I don't seek it out. So mostly I try not to focus on that stuff if it's property rights value. And I have a kind of trick where if it's not $2,000, if it's not $2 million worth of it, which is about how much I've been taxed in the last 3 years, then I can't get worked up, right? My neighbor had his driveway cleaned with a particularly strong cleaner and it bled a lot of white paintish type stuff onto my driveway. That stuff doesn't even give me a tinge of bothering because compared to $2 million, it's so incredibly insignificant. And I have to make sure I don't get upset about anything that's much less than $2 million, or else I have to get that. Even if someone did $100,000 worth of damage to me, however upset I got about that, I'd have to literally get 20 times, logically speaking, I'd have to get 20 times more angry about it, about taxation in the last 3 years, which would be a lot, right? If I got it even like pretty damn upset about $100,000 worth, I'd have to get literally 20 times more pissed off about taxes. So I don't want that. So I don't want to get upset about that stuff. And I generally don't. Anyhow, recipes, right? And it all comes down to being unstuck, as I'm saying. So I talked to my fear video, which you probably all see at this point. And if not, really need to check and make sure it's in to the members area for 2017. It's in the marketing for that. Generally, we just put it there somewhere, but I'll double check. Regardless, the idea with the fear is that fear in every case is your mind carries through its version of planning into the future, seeing into the future. Obviously, it does so through its own representation of the future. It doesn't actually see the actual future, which doesn't exist. But as your mind represents the future, then it gets to an event, right? A situation where that's like negative and that's where it has like an association where that's bad and it gets stuck there. It doesn't carry through its seeing into the future past that event happening. Like going to the dentist, someone will imagine, oh, I'm going to go there and it's going to hurt. And I'm afraid of that. That's a normal thing to think, but inherent within that is the person just stops thinking that it's going to hurt. If they continue through, okay, so it hurts, so then what? Then my tooth gets fixed, presumably. And then I walk out of there, it stops hurting and my tooth is fixed. So the fear will actually disappear if you work through with your mind, work through the scenario where you continue through where it got stuck and then see how things work out afterwards. And things will work out because what happens if you go to the dentist and it hurts and your tooth doesn't get fixed? Then if you need to fix your tooth, you'll keep trying until it gets fixed, right? So you'll always succeed because you could just figure you'll keep on working on how to do it until you succeed. Or you die and things get reset in some way. One way or the other, you're not stuck, right? In a way that you know you're going to be stuck. So once your mind sees it's not stuck, it's going to stop giving you fear in the same way. Because it's a recipe. The recipe makes the result, the emotion, the feeling. And you change the recipe, you change the result. So what I realized though, recently, a couple of days ago, was that I actually do this. The way I motivate myself, but I never really explained this very well. I didn't really realize explicitly how I was doing this quite to the degree that I now do. But this is it's so much like that, the middle part of this process here, right? This overall process of the not matching, how you can know sometimes what doesn't matter. In this case, what you want to do to motivate yourself. Let's say you feel like you're having trouble going to network. Is what if you don't meet new people or meet new people for a relationship, right? Or what if you don't, maybe it's not something specific about getting a new relationship, but maybe you feel like, oh, yeah, I guess I'd like to have a nice love relationship, but I'm not that motivated to do it. It's the same thing as the fear with the dentist. In the case with the fear with the dentist, your mind, it's really easy to figure out what comes next, right? When you think of a fear situation, once you stop it, this is fascinating. I want you to see this. Look how easy it is to figure out what would come next after the event where your mind got stuck. However, we know our mind didn't, even though it's easy consciously when you get consciously involved, but it isn't easy for your mind or else you'd never feel fear. You'd never feel frustrated, right? Like all these things are actually super easy to work through. It's super easy to look at going on a trip, understanding that if there's an unnatural obstacle, you will then know what your new ideal will be to react, make a new plan based on the obstacle is actually natural because it exists right now. Whatever it is, it was unexpected, might feel unnatural at first, but whatever it is, it's there, right? Once you encounter it. So obviously you make a new plan, even if the ideal might change, it might not. I mean, say whatever it's thought is, right? Starbucks is fully closed, then you might go to a different one. If you realize it's Christmas and all the coffee shops are closed, then you drop the ideal of going to a coffee shop for that day, right? If Starbucks is open, but there's just a traffic, then you find a way around the traffic or you just wait, right? So it's really easy, but that can fool you when I'm saying it. It's easy when you get consciously involved, but it's not easy for your mind without you. And it won't happen without you, or else it would already have been done. Like your mind wouldn't give you the negative emotion, right? It's if your child calls for help for something and maybe they just want attention or something, but suppose it's not for that reason. It might be easy if you help them, but it's not easy for that, right? Or if it was, they wouldn't call for help. I'll just stipulate that there's no other motivation for them calling for help. Negative emotions are just your mind calling for help with being stuck. But the flip side, when you want to motivate your mind, it's also not seeing if you would rather have more money or rather have a better or an existing love relationship or anything else. I just use those examples. I use those examples because they're easy to picture and we'll have knowledge about them and so forth. I'm not trying to make them sound like have to be the biggest priorities. They're universal, but I'm not trying to convince you that those are. Anyway, so if you feel like you'd rather have a love relationship or a better love relationship, but if you feel like you're not motivated or same thing with money, then all that's happening is your mind doesn't realize that you're stuck unless you get those things. Or maybe you're not stuck at all, in which case you were just getting that feeling that you should do that from your peers or from somebody else, and it's false, right? So you look for, what if I don't get an ideal, when I say an ideal love relationship, it doesn't mean they do everything you want every second, doesn't mean everything, but something, whatever's realistic in terms of being very, very happy with someone, right? And you can literally just phrase it that way. Remember, sometimes you don't need to know what something is because you can't know exactly what it is. Then you just eliminate at least what it's not and you get a general sense of it. So let's just get a general sense, not even by discussing it, but I'm just saying, just instantly get a general sense of what a reasonable ideal. The word reasonable refers to this time when you can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what it is, but a reasonably ideal love relationship. If you don't have one, are you stuck? And how are you stuck? And it turns out you might not be stuck. You might be able to be fully content in the sense of there isn't bad in your life. So you might need to take care of the things first. You might prioritize things where you just need to deal with it, like money. For me, money is a different sort of thing because without money, there could be, just practically speaking, I don't know how not to have like just some bad stuff in my life without money. There might be a way, but I just don't know what it is. So I have to at least I either have to figure out how to make money or I have to figure out how to not have like starvation and freezing my butt off, not be able to pay for heat or a roof or whatever, having my son starve to death, whatever it might look like. My wife, I mean, she'd be able to, like shooting at money. But one way or the other, there has to be some. That then is a priority over a love relationship because you can not have bad in your life regardless of whether you have a love relationship. The bad would just be circular where you felt lonely, but that would just be your mind feeling stuck about something if you feel bad. You're not fundamentally stuck in a bad way without a love relationship. However, there's all kinds of benefits and good stuff that comes out of a reasonably ideal one. It's just shocking how much good can come of it. So you can't have all that good without a love relationship, which means that, so there's all this good you can have from a reasonably ideal love relationship that you're not going to have without it. So that means that as long as you take care, as long as it doesn't interfere with fundamentally taking care of money at a basic level and whatever else you might need to take care of it, health and so forth at a basic level to make sure you're all right, then it's a pretty reasonably obvious source of a whole bunch of good. Not just any relationship, but a reasonably ideal. And so you carry it through that way, and then and then your mind can feel it and see it. You see how you're stuck without it. Let's use an example with OMG type of money getting. If there's any part of it that you don't feel motivated to do, then think how you'll be stuck without any money. Pretty easy to picture probably. And then think how else you would have to go about making money if you don't do it the OMG way. And then once you feel that, then you could think specifically, if I don't go and start working on ranking a website, then what? Will I be stuck? And show your mind how it's stuck. Even if it's super easy for you to figure out when you think about it, your mind still doesn't have it associated, hasn't done it on its own. And that's one of the critical things you want to get from this webinar. And I've said it in different ways in the past, but your mind doesn't see something, even if it's super easy to see like this, but it doesn't see what happens after the pain of the dentist, just to illustrate. If it's giving you pain, right? If you don't feel motivation where you would be stuck if you don't do the thing you want to be motivated to do, then your mind is just not seeing where it's stuck. You carry to the scenario and see how you're stuck. See how the alternative is clearly worse, or right, where it just means you're stuck. Right? Worse is always about being stuck in some way. So there's your way to motivate yourself. Is you carry through the scenario, the situation in your mind, till you get stuck and see how that is clearly what you don't want to be stuck in that way. And remember, stuck is the language of your brain. Your brain doesn't want to be stuck. It doesn't feel emotion, but it feels the precursor to where it makes you feel emotion, right? Obviously, your mind has priorities. It has to allocate resources, right? That's the proof. That's what motivation is to your mind. It's not a feeling because that's a conscious thing. But obviously your mind has priorities. Obviously it has goals that are with a hierarchy depending on the situation, or else it wouldn't know how to allocate resources. And it does give you a feeling of how to allocate resources. It obviously has a sense of what's important. It's not a feeling in the conscious sense because your mind's not conscious. But there's the precursor to it, right? Like the reason behind it. And you would have no feeling in the first place of what a priority would be. You wouldn't get a feeling of importance if your mind didn't have its own version of a non-conscious version of importance. You wouldn't be so motivated by negative feelings if your mind wasn't motivated by being stuck and not being stuck. And I don't mean that as a problem in this case. I'm using it as a kind of an illustration of proof. Because you're motivated by the idea of being stuck, it means your mind is just not in the same way. Your mind doesn't feel it, but your mind definitely wants to allocate resources so it won't be stuck. And that's fundamental. That's the thing that drives it. It's your actual basic motivation. Your mind wants to make progress. It doesn't seek out how not to get stuck like you can if you get consciously involved. You're great at that when you're consciously involved. This is the whole key to success, is that you realize what your mind does great. It loves making progress and you embrace that, but it doesn't seek out the real places where it gets stuck. It just gives you negative emotions constantly, right? All the ways it gets stuck. You start to work with that and use those as a signal to figure out what's getting it stuck that it can't deal with on its own. But it's the easiest thing in the world for you to deal with it. Just like it's the easiest thing in the world for you to figure out what happens next after the pain of the dentist. And yet, if your mind could do it on its own, it just would. The fact that it's giving you pain, I know I'm repeating myself, but this contains like the whole nut here, right? This is it. Your mind can't do it on its own, but it's so easy. Because it's so easy, though, consciously, you think it's so easy for your mind to do. You just figure, right? Because people associate with their brain, their mind. They don't see the difference. They don't understand the difference. And so if it's easier for you consciously, you figure your mind does it. So, no, it's easy. But it's impossible for your mind without you consciously. So it's getting stuck all the time. Your mind loves making progress. But it doesn't, it think that it would love finding out that it's on the wrong island because then it can make good progress. But obviously it doesn't look for that kind of thing. It wants to feel like it's making progress. So it wants to believe it wants to feel like it's on the right island. But it loves being on the right island. It loves being on the right island, but it doesn't naturally look to see if it is. Consciously, it's the easiest thing in the world to do once you understand, have the right framework, once you have the right representation, the right model for how existence works, then it's so easy for you, which then makes it easy for your mind to do what it does well, or it's already easy for your mind to do what it does well. But now it's not getting stuck. You have an easy time having it not be stuck. But you need to realize that it's not easy for your mind to get unstuck. We've created conditions so that Chance, my son, who's 5, understands, speaks, and is really very fluent with reading. He reads like you and I read at this point, just difficult words, sub-speak, and so forth. 3.5 languages, basically. He's reasonable with Chinese, but he can speak it pretty well compared to me who can't. Like a guy who comes and talks Chinese to him, or a teacher sometimes that he goes to, they can talk to him in Chinese, ask him questions, and he'll answer in Chinese. And so a book, he'll listen to an audio book in Chinese, and he'll know what's going on, where my wife won't. And then totally fluent with Spanish and extremely fluent with Russian and English. I am fluent with only English. My wife, I'm saying this for a reason. My wife is fluent with Russian and English, and she's a little bit of Spanish, but not nearly as good as Chance. And a teeny weeny bit of Chinese, but nothing like. But this is a great metaphor for your mind versus what you can do consciously to go with it. So what did we do? And from my perspective, just myself in a vacuum, I did very little, but without me, likely none of it would have happened. Maybe he'd speak Russian and so forth. But the early reading, but my wife, it turns out she really enjoys, she loves languages and she likes early learning. It's just naturally fun for her. She didn't know that ahead of time, but it just appealed to her a lot. It's not really a concept like that she had growing up in Russia or something like that. But I had come across it with my accelerated learning. I just got them unstuck, right? Got her to notice about it and encouraged it in certain ways. And then it was all downhill and she took care of all of it and I had to do almost nothing. But that really, it's a great illustration for how my mind works. How my life works, is look how effortless it was for me. But that's how I do with my own brain. You just have to do little things to get it unstuck. And then it'll naturally do so much that's easy. Whenever you feel you're in flow, you're motivated, right? That's your brain, right? It's doing what it does well and it's motivated and it's unstuck and it's easy. It's the easiest thing in the world, even if it looks like a ton of effort, right? To certain people who run miles and miles in a day or do extreme sports, it's easy for them in a certain sense, right? They like it, they enjoy it, etc. Meaning that you can't just tell by projection or by how it would be for you or from looking at the overall effort and motion of the body to see how hard something is or easy. Now, from both of us, take Olya and myself as one entity for a second, conceptually. Now let's relate it to Chance. And this is also another analogy between yourself and your brain. And also shows how to make life easy and very successful. Because both the result and the easiness of it are extreme, right? What Chance can do he just turned 5, right? His reading ability and his multiple languages are extreme. Easily top, whatever, 1 out of probably 10,000, right? Probably not even 1 out of 1,000, but maybe 1 out of 1,000,000. Maybe not, but somewhere around there. But life can constantly be like this for you. Because what do we do? It's super easy for him. I speak 1 language and I read 1, right? He knows like 3.5 or more, however good he is at Chinese, and probably growing. I'll probably add some more. Why? Because his mind at that age can learn languages so easily. But would he have learned more than 1 language? And even not even 1 if you keep him in a closet, right? But he'd learn 1 and he wouldn't have learned to read at this point under normal circumstance, right? He would learn to read when he was like 6 or 7 or so and learn 1 language. despite the fact, so it's super, but this is such a good parallel to how life and success works and how it's possible. When I keep telling you life can be easy, I'm absolutely not bragging and I'm not telling you it should already be easy. And I'm not telling you that like nothing about that should belittle anything, be condescending, you're doing something wrong now, except to the extent that we can get our ideas, increase our understanding. But there's nothing condescending or belittling or arrogant or superior about it all when I say it can be easy. What I mean is, so for Chan, but think of that like a brain. Like, so easy to learn all these languages. But the conditions, he had to be unstuck, including get put on the right island, right? It wasn't like there was a whole bunch of Spanish books lying around in the next room and I had to open the door. They weren't there at all. Most people don't have a whole bunch of Spanish books and books in Russian and audio books, and they don't bring a person in to, oh, and so we bring a person in once a week to speak Spanish to them and to speak Chinese to them. And what do we care about? Their initial instinct is, oh, I need to teach him stuff. No, it's not about teaching him. My wife can teach him. He can learn in all kinds of ways. It just needs to feel important. You see, it's that what people think is the closure. This relates to the learning thing, but that relates to everything else. Don't freaking care about that. It actually is counterproductive. But it's hard to get this across. We eventually did, and we had to go through like a dozen different people that spoke Chinese until we got someone who would embrace this idea. Literally, it's that hard. It's that counterintuitive, where they think they want to teach, right? What is that closure? They think they want to show them the animals and the numbers and whatever every damn time, right? Over and up colors, right? For the 100th time. What does that do? It's basically boring. It doesn't make it interesting or feel important. It does the opposite. It's literally counterproductive. But time and again, over and over and over again, these people that spoke Chinese would have this instinct so strong that even if my wife would just tell them, they couldn't do it. But there's nothing to do with Chinese people or whatever. The point is that's in all of our mind. That's how counterintuitive it is. And you need to embrace how counterintuitive it is. Unless you see and feel how counterintuitive it is, you haven't gotten, like you won't do it, because you have to reverse. If you feel like you already got it until you do, if you have premature closure with, right, if I tell you something like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if you don't see how by default your brain will do something different until you reframe things or make a different habit, then you might get locked out. So it's that counterintuitive that they felt like they had to teach and see results in that way. And instead, I just wanted to speak Chinese to him regardless of how well he understood, because I wanted to feel like it was important. And we wanted them to do what he wants, like play with him and get in there with him, but speak Chinese. Because I wanted to feel like here's a person who I want to play with because they're doing what I want. When you're 4 or 5, you want someone to get into what you're doing. You want attention from another person interested in what you're doing. And if that person only speaks Chinese, then you're growing a sticky framework like I talked about. And that's what does it. And that's what we made sure to do and finally got someone to do a pretty good job doing. Even then, it still could be tough. We have to keep making that be the case because it feels wrong. But it's exactly right, because the rest is downhill. Chance can easily learn a language. He's a young child. Young children's brains don't work the way adults' brains. They just absorb languages like nothing. They just have to be exposed to it. But it has to feel like it matters. There has to be a person basically speaking it they feel like they like, or that they want to be able to communicate with. And that's it. That's all they need. And the rest happens automatically. And that's how you want to think of your own mind and body, is you just need to clear the way, have it see how it would be stuck in the other direction, whatever, but you just create the right conditions of being unstuck and it'll go automatically. You say, what I want, as soon as you ask the question, it shows the inherent contradiction in the question. Whatever will really benefit you, whatever you naturally want, like anything that's good for you, there's a natural path to it. You naturally will want it, right? You'll obviously be stuck in the other direction. There's nothing that's like bad for you that you need to get yourself to want, right? Anything that's good for you, you just have to, there's only contradictions or obstacles or unnatural blocks between you and what's good for you, right? Or if there's something bad for you that you feel like you want, getting motivated to not do it, if it's bad for you, it means it's going to get you stuck in some way, right? It's going to mess your health up, which will get you stuck, or it'll mess up your money getting or mess up your relationships, right? Everything bad for you is going to get you stuck in some way. Once again, it's all the same pattern, the same ideas. That's why these ideas are so awesome. These meta ideas, is they just repeat everywhere, right? Everything you're doing in life, it's just the same few things. Once you grasp them and grasp how they're counterintuitive, so you take them serious. So they won't feel important unless you realize they're counterintuitive. If you feel like you already do it, if it's easy, it doesn't feel important. If you're already doing it and it's easy, then of course it doesn't need to feel important to get it because you already got it. But I look around and people don't come anywhere near getting this stuff to start with. I don't mean you guys, I just mean in general in the world. But obviously we're all exposed to the same world, so we're all going to have the same stuff by default. Okay, great. We're doing well. If there's one final thing here. Okay, and I've talked over everything I've been talking about has been about the second line too. Also, how and why framework is the key, not mindset. I wrote how positive attitude's a symptom, not a cause. Looking at this, I don't think I'll get into that right now, but okay, a little bit of this initial framework for you. Starting out, right? Even if we don't get closure, just by having it there. A final thing, I think, and then we can go to some talking to each other. See what we, I might not cover everything here, but I might. Okay. So let's talk a little bit further about consciousness field and how to use it. Let me say this. Let me put it a few ways. When I talk about why the distinction regarding your consciousness field is so, another way to potentially put that, or at least something similar to it, is you want to get used to seeing conclusions or seeing it, just seeing how things seem to you and realizing that knowing the conclusion, being aware of the conclusion, if you see a tree, then normally people don't realize that's a conclusion, that they feel like they are seeing the tree, like they're in a way that's, I know that might not be obvious, so it's a conclusion, but it's basically a conclusion about the outside world. Like they're seeing how the tree is in the outside world. What you want to get used to doing is realizing that you don't need to agree that conclusion is correct in order to understand that you do know the conclusion, not that the conclusion is correct. So let me go to an illustration about, I said triangulating, I wrote triangulating expanded advisors illustration. So to start with, I'm going to expand on this at least one way, past how I start. But suppose you are confined to a room and you're a president of a company and you have advisors, a president of a country or a company, whatever, and you have advisors and they're telling you, right, oh, we should institute this policy, or people are saying this about you, or people are demanding this, or you should do this, or what, you should do that. And you might feel like, damn, but I don't know anything. These advisors have their own agendas and they sometimes lie to me. Sometimes they tell the truth, but sometimes they twist things or they tell me part of the truth, right? And there's a critical thing here is that what people do is they vacillate, they waffle in the background. They don't often think about it at all, but they also that like waffle here. They think based on two different conclusions, both of which are wrong, two different kind of premises. Most of the time they'll just so the naive way would be just to take what the advisors say at face value because it's all you're going to get, let's say. And what that's parallel to is people look at the world, including they look at their mind's representation of the future and their conclusions and what they feel certain of, and they take that at face value. So they imagine eating ice cream and they imagine liking it, and they take that for truth, that they're going to eat the ice cream and like it. Or they feel like someone's a jerk or will be a jerk, they take it as the truth. Or they imagine doing some activity and they say, I'm not going to like to go out to a networking meeting, or I'm going to feel shy. But that's a conclusion. You're not looking at the actual event. You're looking at a mental representation of what the future might be like, right? But sometimes you might feel uncertain about something. But when you don't, so just like the advisors could sometimes come to you and say, hey, we're not sure what to do about this. What do you think? There could be all kinds of times when they're asking you about your opinion. And you might feel like, oh, I have all this power. I'm the one dictating events. But of course, those advisors could manipulate you however they want by which options they give you and what they don't tell you, what they do tell you, right? So same thing with your own brain. It gives you all sorts of options, and there's times that it tells you it's not sure, right? And it doesn't say, I'm not sure. It tells you that you're not sure, right? People by default are always identifying with their brain. But however you think of it, your mind gives you all kinds of decisions that you have to make consciously. There's plenty of times when you feel, or it feels, but then you feel like you feel uncertain. Because of that, people think that they're making all kinds of decisions. They have all this power. They have all this control over their minds. But really, it's very narrow. And so people, and they said, vacillate between two things. Most of the time, they're taking the naive view that at least if they feel certain about something, such as how they're going to feel or like a future event, or whether a person is a good person or a trustworthy person or a likable person or whatever, or a jerk or whatever. If they feel certain, they'll take that at face value. That's a naive thing. The other, but it's invisible, so people don't think they're being naive because it's their own mind. And when it comes to the physical world, it's called naive realism, right? In terms of thinking that we see the outside world as it is. The other thing people vacillate with sometimes when they get philosophical, and there was a question about this a few times ago, people say, so one person asked me, is everything arbitrary? Might have been Haristian, someone else. But so sometimes they'll get this kind of radical skepticism, but you can't live that way. So then the pendulum will swing to extremes, and they'll just go back to the naive view of their mind and the world where they just accept everything that they feel certain about at face value. They think they think they're not naive because, again, they don't take everything at face value. They're skeptical about all sorts of stuff, but not about the stuff they're certain of. The key I talked about in the very first original Crushing the Game, a couple months before the rest of the series, was the one fundamental key to life is how you treat it when you feel total certainty, how you treat fabricated certainty, I call it. You don't feel like it's fabricated, but your mind's fabricating certainty. We need this quarantine thing. It's like third thing on that slide I gave last time, right? You need to have the separate space where you can build knowledge and certainty and be skeptical of all fabricated certainty, but skeptical. The trouble is radical skepticism, where you feel like, I can't know anything then. If I don't believe my advisors, then what do? I don't know anything, the president could conclude. That president, or you as the president in this illustration, is missing something critical, and it relates to the consciousness field, the other thing that's on the slide, right? There, the first thing on the slide, okay? You do have a foothold, and it's not what you think, or it might be now, we've talked. But without the foothold, you're forever vacillating between naivety and radical skepticism. All right? The naivety is when you feel certain, you accept it at face value. Then there's the radical skepticism. Oh, maybe I know nothing, but you can't live there. You can't really operate from that place. And then you revert back to the naive. If the advisors can really, they're like, all right, make your case. You might say to your advisor, if they really convince you, if they're really convincing, then you're like, all right, that's what I believe. The trouble is that they could be convincing, but it can still be false. Right. The trouble is you can feel certain of something, it can still be wrong. So you're trapped eternally until you find a foothold. And the foothold might not seem adequate because people want closure, like I've talked about a lot on this webinar. But once you realize you need a foothold, you need to start building a framework, which is like a foothold that's growing and sticky, like I talked about with learning. But once you embrace that it doesn't matter how little a foothold is, as long as it's solid. If it's not solid, it's not a foothold. It doesn't matter how small your beachhead is, right? If you're trying to invade Berlin or something, or invade Germany, you need to establish a beachhead. And it doesn't matter how small to start with, but it has to be secure. It has to be a beachhead, right? You can't not be there. It doesn't matter how great your base is in England. If you don't have a foothold in Germany, you're not going to get off the ground, so to speak, right? You're not going to get your invasion going. If not a beachhead, then any counterexample to what I'm saying is just another form of a foothold, right? If you develop an air base in some way, or whatever it is, but you need to have some way to launch your attack from and to expand from, right? Because if you develop a beachhead, then if it's small, the first thing you'll do is build off of that and get a bigger beachhead, or take more of the beach. So the foothold is, wait a second, to start with what your advisors are saying. So when they tell you something, you know that they're saying it. That's different than knowing that they're true, but what they seem to be saying, at least, or again, the conclusion, you have to think of it, you have to interpret what I'm saying in a way to make it correct, because there are different ways to interpret this. But there's a way that you need to realize with your consciousness field. The whole point of it is that you don't have to get tangled into what is your consciousness field and what isn't. What you want to focus on is, you know how things seem. If you feel like you're seeing a tree, then you're aware that you feel like you're seeing a tree. And whatever it is you're aware of about how the tree seems, you're aware of that. It might not be true about the outside world. People have the same pendulum swinging between radical skepticism and naive realism when it comes to the physical world, when it comes to like scientific knowledge and or just general knowledge about the outside world. They do something like Hume, where he's like David Hume, where he was like, I'm not going to trust something unless it's a fact based in what I can like touch. I might be paraphrasing to greater or lesser degree, but unless I can feel it with my hands, unless I can perform the experiment, duplicate it, right? But if it's tangible, that's what I trust. Not like abstract theory. I trust it if it's tangible. It's just materialistic that, and a lot of people subscribe to that on some level. Ironically, that theory itself, that heuristic, that way of operating violates its own standard because his idea that it has to be tangible, that idea isn't tangible. He can't hold that idea in his hand. He can't test the truth of that idea with his hands or with the physical world. So it's ironic that he himself made that error because you're always going to be wrong when you're vacillating between naive realism and radical skepticism. But this is where philosophy ends up going nonstop. Okay. So what you need to, what the way out, and what I was trying to get to with the distinction about consciousness field is that you can know how things seem without knowing you can know how the conclusion seems. So if your mind says that guy's a jerk, then you know that you don't know that the guy's a jerk, but you know that you're thinking that guy's a jerk, right? However you want to phrase it, but you're aware of the conclusion that that guy's a jerk. That you don't know the truth of the conclusion, but you know that you're aware of the conclusion itself. And where does that get you? Where once you understand that truth involves matching, you can be aware of conclusions and start to see what matches or specifically what doesn't, especially what doesn't add up. All right. So you could say, all right, I'm aware of the conclusion that guy's a jerk. All right. So what does a jerk mean to my own mind? What's that? And if there's not a clear thing that immediately sticks to mind, then, well, that doesn't add up. How can I be sure of the conclusion that the guy's a jerk if I don't have very distinct clarity on what jerk even means? And if you were to get clarity on what a jerk means now, you can start to at least see if the guy matches it. Well, can a person match being a jerk? I don't know. Does it mean they once acted like a jerk? Now the person's a jerk forever? That's what it means? Then you ask, is that really useful? Now at this point, does that match useful? Because your thinking is supposed to be useful, isn't it? Why think? Why plan? If not to achieve some goal, right? To achieve some ideal. In other words, to be useful. So is it a useful idea of jerk? Is that the guy once acted in a way that fit within my target, my general idea, whatever a jerk might mean. I don't have a definition for you. Maybe maybe we can come up with one, but we don't even have to bother for the moment. I might do it in the future. Maybe on this webinar, maybe not. But I think I can illustrate this without getting into that. So you come up with some idea and then you think, well, if they did it once, maybe I want to have a sense that they have done it once. And now I'm saying how a person's thought process may go. Wait a second, let me ask this. Given my idea of what a jerk is, do I think that almost every person would have done that at some point? If yes, then it's not a very useful classification if everyone fits in it. However, it still might be relevant to be aware that the guy is a jerk. Now, one thing we might also become aware of is that our brain tends to put more weight on first impressions because that tends to form a category. And then our brain tends to use categories to project and to filter, which then creates either a halo effect with the opposite, either a bias against someone or basically a bias for them. And so we don't want to do things that are going to do that. But that just starts to illustrate how we can start to think more accurately and start to see whether things match. And now I put the word triangulating. It turns out that in life, we don't have a situation where all we have is we're a president in a room and we have advisors and all we hear is what they say. What really matches life is that you have multiple forms of observing the world that give conclusions, none of which we can know are true in a naive way, instantly and automatically. So we want to stop looking for a source of perfect knowledge. All right? A source of perfect knowledge makes the mistake. If you have X modified by a Y, which is whatever the outside world is, modified by your perspective, just speaking simply for a moment, you don't have to get too into nuances of what the outside world is or perspective to understand the general sense of what I mean by that. So if we have X modified by a Y, And we're aware of the end result, Z, which is neither X nor Y, but the result of them modifying each other, right? That's what we're aware of, right? We're aware of after our perspective interacts with the outside world in some sense. I ultimately have more to say about that, which I've already said as well in the past in certain places like in alchemy and so. But we don't need all that right now. Just the simple sense of what I'm saying is enough. So if the outside world interacts with the perspective, X gets modified by Y, creates Z, which is what we're aware of. Then looking for the perfect X is inherently contradictory, right? It's inherently the wrong way to go about finding knowledge. But do people do that? Exactly, that's what they do. So there are these basic mistakes that make no sense once we look at it properly. So we see that it doesn't match, doesn't make sense. In other words, like people will look at the Bible could be perfect, but it's X. We mix our perspective with it no matter what. Do you see? So looking what now a revelation, this isn't about the Bible. I'm just illustrating something, right? I'm illustrating because people do this from gurus. They do it from their own mind. They do this in every way, shape, and form. People look for the untainted X, and you got to stop. You can embrace a good source in the same way that you can embrace your mind doing what your mind does. But a good source is only going to help you with the gray area. It doesn't, you must listen to this. Sorry, obviously listen to all of it, but take note of this phrase in effect. There is no source that will allow you to abdicate, to not do your conscious responsibility. That's the key. The Bible could be perfect, but it doesn't matter if it is or not. If God comes down and talks to you, God cannot talk to you in such a way where you can still abdicate your conscious responsibility to do your part of analyzing information, doing the knowledge process of looking to see what matches and what doesn't. Because any X is going to get mixed with Y anyway, your perspective. There's plenty of ways that an experience, your consciousness field, something that can be in your consciousness field, sometimes can never be the supposed actual X that you're looking at. Because there can be two totally different types of things, or whatever the word, we don't hardly have a word for it. We'll illustrate this, no problem illustrating this with a computer code. Can you write computer code good enough that people see the actual code as is, as it really is? No, because you see pixels on a screen when you look at a computer, period. All you can ever see from a computer is pixels on a screen, right? Literally nothing else. So pixels are not the same as code. Doesn't matter how perfect the code is, you don't see the code as the code, pixels. You could see pixels that represent code, right? If you're like looking at programming language directly, but that representation is still not the code itself. It might seem if you get close enough, and you might be able to get a situation where your representation of the code is for all intents and purposes, for all practical purposes, for the situation at hand is identical, because the overlap between the representation and the X, the original thing, the code, is perfect for your purposes. And this happens all the time. When you walk around through a forest and don't bump into trees, then your representation of the trees is perfect for the sense of walking around. The overlap between how the trees seem and how they are in terms of bumping into them is perfect. There's plenty of other ways in which it's not perfect, right? Like something that's brown and the molecules have no actual brown in them, and there's 99% empty space, you don't see that. So there's all kinds of ways that the representation of the tree doesn't match the actual tree. However, the overlap for the purpose at hand can be perfect. And there's plenty of times when that's the case. And when we talk, I might say something where the meaning you get is perfect in the sense of for the use that we're trying to get, it overlaps in every way that we need it to. So you can look for that or try to create that, but stop looking for a source that gets you to abdicate your responsibility for checking properly knowledge. Oh, and I'll say a final thing here that relates to the triangulating. What I was saying was, it turns out that the world isn't such the case that you only have one angle on information. So what I mean is if you're the president in this room with his advisors, but you also get other forms of feedback that are separate from everybody, such as let's say there's polling from a different source and it goes up or down. That source might also, maybe you can literally look at, maybe you're confined to your castle, but you can look out, or maybe you're not. Maybe you can go out and you could talk to people and you can pretend you're not the king, or to go to a bar or a tavern. And obviously I've gotten away from being president of the company here. Now you're president of a country or something. But however you want to do it, obviously we could make it work for president of a company, goes out and measures the company or goes to one of the, let's say a president of Starbucks, you can go into a Starbucks and hear how the customers are, what they're saying. Let's say you pretend they don't know who you are. You could do it where they know who you are and talk to people, and you could do it where they didn't, right? In either case, you once again are not getting perfect. Like your X is not Z. You're not looking for the perfect source of information that it is exactly as it seems, right? There could be all kinds of reasons why it's a small sample size, or you get a few people that are in a bad mood, or you get people that are trying to tell you correctly. They're customers of Starbucks. You're the president of Starbucks. You're going and talking to people. They're trying to tell you correctly, but there's problems that none of the people that you talk to happen to be encountering, and therefore it's invisible, right? There's all kinds of things that will make you're observing imperfect, but it helps you triangulate. Now, when you talk to your advisors, if you go out and as the president talk to people, and then you go out and disguise and talk to people, now those are different ways that you triangulate, right? You're getting different feedback each time. Each time you're not looking for feedback that perfectly matches the reality, so to speak. You're not looking for the Z to match the X. But the more you can triangulate, the more you can, what you're trying to do is not arrive at the truth directly, even through triangulating. What you're trying to do is notice things. Again, you're looking for what doesn't match. You're looking for what gets people stuck, or gets you stuck, or your company stuck, or your country stuck. You see, practically speaking, as a person, bad feelings are showing you where you're stuck, or if someone else is getting hurt or has something bad, then that's a red flag that you can understand more potentially, or yourself if there's bad. So you're not even trying to see what is. You're trying to see what's getting stuck, what isn't, what doesn't match. You're trying to notice more. When you go out and do a sales presentation, when you understand that you're trying to notice more stuff rather than just see what works, because you don't see X directly. You don't see the answer directly. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you take over the castle, right? You accumulate enough stuff, and the castle gets invaded and you get in there. You get plenty of answers that are correct. So you'll make sales presentations to sale, but you're still looking for bottlenecks. Your mind, just like Chance, learned so many languages so easily. And he learned to read by we put the conditions around it. Lots of books, literally thousands by this point, right? In different languages, etc. His mother got excited about reading next to him, right? That's what happened. That's creates the conditions for an infant. When he was literally 1 year old, she would be reading to him and showing him words and flashcards with words and saying what the symbol was, what the auditory word was. She'd say it and show him what it looked like. You create conditions and your mind will do the rest automatically. It'll feel like you're doing it, but you want to learn to distinguish and ride the wave. You can get in flow, but even if you feel flow, you have the red flags. If there's some issue, if there's something where you get stuck, bad feelings, that's your mind getting stuck somehow. They'll take you out of flow. That's okay. You don't ignore it unless there's an urgent problem that you have to deal with. If it's something can be less of a priority, but you don't just delete. You don't ignore a red flag. They help you notice things. That's your conscious responsibility. You take care of that, and it's easy. What you're supposed to do consciously is easy. That's the irony of it. It's easy to see what'll happen next after you go to the dentist, right? Or after your plan doesn't work out the way you hoped. What if it doesn't? What if there's an obstacle I didn't see? What do I do? Go to pieces? No. It's really easy to figure out what the ideal is, what you'd ideally do. It's not easy for your brain. It's very hard for your brain. Your brain just can make you feel frustrated. It's stuck. But it's super easy for you consciously. As you learn to distinguish this more and more, you do what's easy for you consciously, and it's easy consciously, and you let your mind do, and you feel like you can get immersed in it. You can be consciously identified with your brain, where you feel like you are your mind and body for that time, and that's fine. You're making little micro decisions within what you're doing, and that's fun too. You enjoy that. but it's all pretty easy ways you learn to distinguish. Okay, great. So that helped give more of a sense of what I meant with consciousness field. It doesn't even matter what I meant by it. What the foothold, what we're trying to get is not what I mean by consciousness field, but what your foothold is for knowledge and how you use your conclusions as conclusions. You go and do a sales presentation and you're going to get more fodder for helping you notice stuff. You're not looking for the perfect template of how to, oh, now I'm so great and I have the perfect template for a sales. You're looking to notice things. And maybe you stumble upon or narrow things down, you get the perfect template, great. But you just notice your way to it. Like you're one way or another by listening to your advisors, by going out and talking to people at the actual Starbucks, so to speak, or a tavern like I illustrated, or looking at other ways, just looking at see how commerce is flowing or how happy people are. Or maybe everything looks like it's flowing great. Everyone's telling you it's great, but you look out and you see there's an alley where there's people and they're doing terrible. And then maybe that'll help you notice something additional that you can have a breakthrough on in your kingdom. Jumping to a little share, but hopefully I think it probably reasonably easy to follow with the jump. So even if everything seems to be going nicely, you still look for things that might, where things might be stuck, right? You want to be looking for ways where you're stuck. You want to find it because either you don't find anything, and that's fine if there's no problem, right? You don't find any symptoms, right? I'm saying you find symptoms of being stuck, and then you find out what the sticking point is next. You either find symptoms, which will lead you to a breakthrough, or you don't find anything, but you want to be looking, and things will get you stuck. You don't need to notice things that aren't getting you stuck, right? If if personally my finances are not stuck by taxes, so I don't need to be looking at it. I don't need to be focused on it, and you might not need to either. Overall, as a world, that's one of the things that getting people stuck with relating to each other, with being happy, more for the people that are doing the taxing than the people being taxed, right? They're doing something so horrific that they can't be happy. They can get a little local peak where they're myopic, so narrow. In order to be happy, if you're a taxer, you have to eliminate so many aspects of life that you don't look at. You have to stay a teeny weeny bubble. Because if you look around, you'll see what you're doing so hard, just like being a child molester, right? So overall, it's a sticking point for people being happy. So that's why it matters to me. But in terms of finances, it doesn't matter. It doesn't get me stuck. You can get totally free financially. And that's another way for you not to feel a priority of it or bothered by it right now in a way that's not helpful, right? You don't need to feel angry about being taxed, frustrated, or like a victim when it's not the right priority or time. The way not to is it is not going to stop you from breaking free financially. You can get to $3 million, whatever it takes, regardless of the tax rate, as long as it's not 100 or which it isn't, right? So that practically speaking, if you're listening to this, it's not necessarily a place where you're stuck, and it's not a place you're going to get unstuck, right? You're not going to do anything about it by the time you make money if you're focused on making money properly. And then by carrying through that scenario, like I just did, you can get your mind off the top, right? That's why Cotton says you don't want to think about, he's mentioned, like, you don't want to be focused on being a victim, have a victim mentality to make money. And that's true in the sense of either something is stopping a full block for you making money, or something you can do something about. It's a headwind that you can do something about with a good bang per buck. Like if you invest on getting rid of that headwind or current against you, then you can get rid of it likely. Then it could be worth investing in. But anything where you're a victim and it's not something where either you can do something about with efficient resources or that you can do anything about it at all, agree, totally not worth it. That's why I don't pay attention to competition. Maybe the competition gives a little bit of headwind. Maybe it doesn't. A headwind is against you, right? Like a vector against you. But what am I going to do with it? Mostly it just makes people be intimidated by looking at it. And so it's not relevant to look at, just like looking at taxes isn't relevant if you're trying to make money. Probably, unless you can do something about it. If you go to the ballot box, certainly vote for the person more likely to reduce or eliminate. But other than that, there's not a lot you can do. If you're talking to someone in a casual conversation, great. You have an understanding of why it's bad. You can influence people here and there in your spare time. But anything where you're a victim, you have to take care of your parents are sick, or you were abused when you were little, or whatever the heck, you're a woman, you're young, you're old, you're a minority, you're not a minority, whatever. You're not a superstar in some clear way that you could see. Whatever it might be, you're not good at sales, whatever. Either it's efficient for you to get good at sales. Obviously, you should read a few books or learn a little bit about it. You have from me, you can learn from other places. But you'll get what you can get with reasonable resources. And then if you're only moderate at sales, or even if it's a weakness for you, then make up for it. Focus on where you're going to get more bang for buck. Again, you can you can try going through some sales training and see where that gets you. And that gives you a sense of whether that's a good place for but it's just a headwind. It's not going to be a full block and if it is, then you got to deal with it. Whatever amount of resources it takes for a full block, you got to deal with it. But otherwise, you get your product and service in a way where it's what people want, and you get in front of an audience. You invest in finding people that categorize you and your service in a way that it's going to be pretty easy for them to buy what they want to buy from you. And then you don't need a lot of sales ability. Sales ability is really only just an advantage, like a convenient. And I don't rely on it much myself. It's mostly I try to get something that people want and get in front of people that want it. That's my main technique. And get myself in a state. I've talked to you about that. You know what you're going to do to fulfill, right? So you have that confidence. You want to learn enough to not get yourself categorized in a way that's going to blow you out, right? Incompetent, basically, is mainly incompetent. And there's all kinds of ingredients to being competent or pure incompetent or incompetent. But if you know what you're going to do after you make the sale, then that's helpful. A lot of people don't. They don't only have a vague idea, but that's going to project confidence. That's why I teach you about that in my 10 things that I gave about client conversion that's in everyone's members area. Okay, excellent. That's good for now. Of course, I said we do a lot of discussion. Of course, that didn't quite turn out to be perfectly true, but I'm really glad. I think this came together great and really progressed things. Okay, I'll just kind of poke around here at the end, look at the middle, at the beginning. Thank you, Reese. Appreciate all the people that really helped also in the beginning here. Maria said I had two bottlenecks. I decided I will design my own website. Second site, understanding it's okay not to go full like frontal assault, right? Doesn't matter what others think, pace myself, taking breaks, sleeping. Second bottleneck, I own rentals, like rental properties, problems, dumping money, right? Decided I'm spending too much money to sell the rentals, financial, Dave Ramsey. Yeah, Dave Ramsey stuff is nice. I read it. I got wealthy without having to follow his. So he helps plenty of people. But it's interesting. I noted for a number of reasons, but it's interesting to note that even $20,000 a month, which in OMG, first of all, plenty of people, they have to make it, but it's also a normal number in OMG. That's like owning 20 rentals, kicking off a net after expenses of $1,000. Isn't that crazy? Like 20 rental properties making you a net of $1,000, which could be a $250,000 house could net you $1,000 rent. And even that's high, right? If you're paying a mortgage. But even if you had the money flat out to rent it, it could rent for $1,300 or $1,400. Depends on the neighborhood place. But it's incredible, right? How much real estate it takes in order to get $20,000 a month, let's say. So yeah, I've never personally been into real estate. You know what's more secure than real estate? Is just having money in your actual bank account, making interest in a way that's certain. And specifically, I figured out annuities, right? Annuities are, the thing with annuities, there's not a lot of money to be had in telling people. I don't make any money telling you, but people make money usually in other ways. And so that's why you get all kinds of other advice. But if you get an annuity, then what that means is you're just giving money to like an insurance company. And there's some that are so well established and they have reinsurance, rate of insurance and so forth. And you can spread it out to a couple of them. But they'll just pay you at a certain point, either right away or at a certain time, right? But what I did specifically was I put money with like Guardian. I put $250,000 with Guardian Insurance Company, and I did that maybe 3 years ago when I was 42, and then when I was 60, that'll pay me $2,300 or $44, I think, every month for the rest of my life. However long I live, and I got one. There's different options, but it's pretty much that simple. I got something called Refund Cert, but I illustrate this as a thing of you narrow down what you can know. There's less clutter, less confusion, less things. So it's pretty specific. Refund Cert means I'll get that $250 back, or my inheritor will, like my heir, I guess they're called, will, if I die before 60, or if I die before they paid out $250. Now, of course, if I'd put that money in the stock market, it has more chance of increasing by over time, right, to a larger amount. However, so there's more upside with various things, but this is so simple and straightforward, right? It roughly works out to, for every $100,000 you put into an annuity, you'll get about $1,000, Or if it's instant annuity, it'll be about 1/20th. But if it's going to mature in 15 or 20 years, it's more like 1/100 per month, not per year. So that's not 1/100 of the money. Of course, it's just monthly. And then what that means is that if I live till 90, then my money is tripled or quadrupled, with zero chance of it going away. What that allows you to do is get a baseline. So you get a foothold where you get $5,000 or $7,000 coming in monthly with an annuity, and then you can play games with the rest of it if you want. But there's something with real estate where things can happen, even if it's a nifty idea. But these days of the internet, you can make money and put into annuity. Not really saying what's right or wrong, but it's just interesting to see alternatives. Oh, and also my time and my investment could go into my business, and real estate's more of a full-time thing. And plus, anything you're investing in, most of it is you're really either gambling or you're like investing in your own knowledge and effort, right? Or you're doing both. You're gambling and you're investing in your own knowledge and effort. With an annuity, you're not doing those things. There's no time and there's no gambling and there's no my own knowledge except for just the bare bones knowledge of what I just told you. So you eliminate all the cost that's invisible that people try to ignore, of risk and time, and that you're investing in your own knowledge, which might be pretty crappy compared to people that are really focused on it full time. So instead I put zero in every other way that I try to invest it, just so to speak. It doesn't really turn out nearly as well as the annuity I run. I also have a whole life insurance policy for $500,000 with a different company that works out similar to an annuity, where with the guaranteed interest on that, then I can instant annuity it when I'm 60 or 65. And it'll be about that one out of 1,000 for every 100,000 I put in originally per month. I remember back when I said about it, I don't know if it's sexy or not with that, when I was on that slide about the overall frame. And Joseph said it's sexy, awesome, and liberating all at the same time. Can you define safe knowledge? Yeah. Safe knowledge is knowledge that you have because you can look at how you can be aware that opposite of that conclusion, that statement being true, can't possibly be right. It doesn't add up, doesn't match. And it doesn't matter. What it's safe from is how you feel. So you don't have to necessarily feel that God exists, but once you get the idea of a consciousness field, which is literally just what you're aware, the opposite of you having a consciousness field is you're aware of literally nothing. You're fully unconscious. If you're aware of anything whatsoever, then you have a consciousness field. Even if you can't pin down exactly what your consciousness field is, that's yet another example of you don't necessarily know exactly what's in the gray area, what to pinpoint in the gray area, but you know what's black, which is, so to speak, what you can cross off, which is that you're not unconscious. So you're conscious. And whatever it is you're conscious of, I'm just giving it a word, consciousness field. You say, well, what is my consciousness field? I already told you. It's the opposite of what it would be like to not be conscious. And then whatever you're conscious of, that whatever happens to be in it, that's your consciousness. So it's super simple. It's only by confusing yourself and complicating it or projecting that you wouldn't understand what I'm saying, or needing to skip right to the closure where you got to know what's in it. And you know how it seems, whatever it is that it seems, that's how it seems. You don't know that the conclusion's correct, but how it seems is how it's. And specifically, you can know how it doesn't seem. So do you think that you're aware of a pink elephant right now, actually physically standing between you and your iPhone or your computer? I'm sure not. You might imagine it when I say it, but you don't seem to actually see it like you see a tree or something. So you know you don't see that. That's the kind of stuff you can know. You can know what doesn't match your consciousness field. So you can sometimes know what doesn't. You can sometimes know for sure what doesn't match your consciousness. Some things might be so close that you can come up with to what you seem to see that you're not sure, do I seem to see that or not? But some things clearly you don't, and that's the kind of thing. Good. Okay, good. That helps. And so regarding God existing, then okay, if you have a conscious field, something has to be able to create it, and that will be God. Doesn't mean that everything else you believe about God is true, but there's got to be some entity that can create conscious fields. And then you can delve more into what other qualities that you would have to have. Whether or not you feel like God exists, then that knowledge can be safe. Or just that if you'd like to be in better physical shape, you can think, what shape don't I want to be in for sure? What definitely doesn't match how I want to be? I don't want to be 1,000 pounds and about to die. I don't want to be fully repulsive to other people. I'm not saying that being fat is repulsive. but there's a way that to some people, there's some weight that is going to create some sort of repulsion and difficulty with relationships, practically speaking, in the world, because the opposite is just clearly ridiculous, that there's no amount of weight that wouldn't create some relationship issues with other people, right? That's not true. So at some point, it's creates problems with relationships, creates problems with getting around, physically uncomfortable. So you definitely don't want that. And then you can try to narrow it down from there. You might not be able to be certain that you have to be your supposed ideal weight, or you might be able to, who knows? But you might not feel like exercising right away or like eating healthily, but there's some things you can know perhaps about your weight that will have an influence. And if the thing with the safe knowledge is it's some vector, it's some amount of influence on your actions and feelings and beliefs and associations in your mind, even if it's weak and slow, as long as your mind can't affect that knowledge, that it's only one direction. So inexorably is going to make progress without having regress. No, I haven't gone through Six Sigma. I know that it's a specific application that addresses bottlenecks, and that's why it's effective to the degree that it's effective. But what we want to realize overall is that the only success route is through addressing this, right? And any kind of specific applications are going to look better than when people ignore it. And so there you go. Justin said, thinking about fear, looking at the current slide, how do you feel about the concept that all human fear stems from the 6 basic human fears as defined by Napoleon Hill? You can just analyze that in the face of being stalked, and you can analyze my point about all fear is fear of being stalked. He'd be trying to come up with it. But I think that he came up with that just through interviews and thinking he couldn't think of anything else besides those things, which isn't a perfect method. The method that people take a philosophy or success philosophy or whatever is the interview, the observation method. They observe something from many different angles. In other words, they're interviewing a bunch of different people and so forth. But what they'll be blind to is what all their angles have in common. For example, if somebody interviews only people that are successful, and I'm not saying Napoleon Hill did that. He probably at some point talked to people that were unsuccessful or at least observed them and thought about them. But if you interview only 100 people that are successful, then you'll get a lot of different angles on success, but whatever they all have in common, then will be invisible to you. Remember, when you observe something from multiple angles, the different angles will help you notice stuff, but whatever premises are in common or invisible assumptions are there, then you'll miss. What games do you play that you enjoy and helps you with critical thinking? I like strategy games. I like role-playing type games. Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game. I like usually games on a computer these days. It's more convenient. I like single-player games because then I can turn them off and on when I want without other people. If I want to interact with other people, I can do other stuff. And most, not Dungeons and Dragons, but a lot of games are competitive that are multiplayer. And I'm not really interested in competing with other people these days. It's not interesting to me. Games help with critical thinking because you can so quickly go through the process of where you don't really have a lot of framework for that specific game. You have a kind of a clearly defined result you're trying to get to, or to some degree clearly defined, to some degree not. You can win the game, but you can also achieve different achievements, or you can have different standards, achieve it without dying, or you can come up with your own standards. Sometimes plus you're just trying to have fun doing it. And so you can say, well, what's fun? So obviously my overall goal here is to have fun and maybe to learn and grow. How am I doing with doing that? If I'm not having fun, why? And so it helped me to look at the whole goal achieving process in a sort of like a scientific in the sense that you remove a lot of the confusion in life. There's so much going on. There's so many variables and stuff that it can be hard to see what's going on. But with games, it's defined enough and you can repeat the process of winning or achieving a goal enough where it can be harder to do in general life. What do people do in life? They relate to each other. They go to events, they go on trips, they do their career, but you don't really see like a goal achievement process from start to finish as much in real life in a lot of cases. And that's why training like military people, you come up with simulations, right? And then that can help. Hopefully that address your question a bit, Maria. Desmond says, this is awesome. Great. Keep it coming. I'd love a webinar on parenting. I appreciate that. If I was talking about parenting, then I'd be doing the whole chopping off the gray area thing would help explain. It's not that I know all the right things to do, but there's certain things to do, not through experience, right? Experience just helps you notice things if you're looking for it, right? If you're looking overall at ways to get stuck. But there's certain things that I would know, like through like the logical process, using my experience to help me to notice what to think about. Right. Maybe at least I use parenting as examples, and I can use some more. But maybe I could do it in a kind of a metaphorical way where it helps to illustrate the success process regarding parenting. Again, remember, you don't have to get everything right in order to realize that, like, narrow things down about getting things wrong. And I think that the results I'm getting with parenting do look like a lot of my life, where when you narrow down enough about not making certain mistakes, then the wiggle room is less. And so there's less problems and issues. And the overall result looks pretty like relatively successful. Not necessarily perfect because you haven't narrowed down everything. Right. But I think it looks pretty successful, just like most of my life looks pretty successful. Right. Like my money getting life doesn't look, I'm not Zuckerberg. There's thousands of people with more money than me. There's people that might enjoy what they do for money more than me, et cetera. But overall, especially if you look at what I started with, where I was starting out, and then it looks pretty successful. So that's why I think my parenting looks that way at this point. This bridging is so helpful. Great way to understand motivation. Yeah, I'm really excited about the carrying through. Maybe you guys can report back to me a little bit over the week. When we come back, I'll do a crushing the game, even it'll be during the Ride the Wave event, the live event. But a lot of people have to cancel the webinar. So I think I'll do one. Maybe I'll schedule it so that people that are going to the live event won't have a direct conflict with it. So maybe if there's nothing on Wednesday, maybe I'll do it on Wednesday because the live event will be over. Oh, check with Cotton and see, look, which Wednesday he's skipping. And anyway, see about that. Maybe he's skipping this Wednesday and not next Wednesday. I'm going to think about it. But I'll and try not to have it exactly overlap with when there's live talking going on at the event, but still do the webinar next week. I appreciate that, Megan and Justin, about that's a great way to understand motivation. So maybe you guys, I was saying, can work on this over the week where you look at some things where you're wondering about your motivation for, and you carry through and look at how, if you don't do the thing you're thinking about, how you'll be stuck, including maybe stuck running in circles or just stuck with a headwind that you don't need, or a problem that, like, things that'll make your life more difficult that you don't need, right? In a way where it wouldn't, like, the resources that it would take to get rid, like, something is stuck, if there's a current against you, something in your life that's making it more difficult, maybe not stopping you, but making it more difficult. And if you realize that you might realize that the resources that it would take to get rid of that thing are so worth the cost it would have of just having that ongoing. Okay? Just like with, like, I talk about niggling tasks. If you look at something that's nagging at you, if you think about how things would be if it wasn't there, that if the task was finished, and then you take a look at, or take a look at how it would be if you don't do it, where you have this issue niggling things still out. Then you take a look, compare it. Remember, you and your brain see things by both of them you see by contrast. So carry through the scenario, look at the scenario a little bit of not doing the niggling task and how that would be and feel. And then if you do it, how you'll feel, and also the resources that it'll take and so forth. Sometimes it's just a lack of seeing the contrast really that you're missing. The real key to motivation, using what Justin wrote, he's quoting me here, but then he goes on. The real key to motivation, using what your brain is really most scared of. Makes sense as long as you don't allow it. Yeah, see, your brain is like afraid of being stuck, but you're not creating fear because you already know how to get through fear, right? Like, you're going to see how you get stuck if you don't do the thing that you are trying to motivate yourself to do. Remember, my understanding is that you're fundamentally not stuck in life. God doesn't set things up so that we're fundamentally as beings ever. So you're never going to look at something where you're stuck and just be stuck. There's no inevitable stuckness that you have. So all you're doing by seeing the contrast of where you'd be stuck is to show your brain what to do to not be stuck and to be motivated to do it. So it's never going to get you stuck to look at being stuck. That's an angle on this basic mistake that people make about negative thinking, where looking at things that'll get you stuck is never a negative thing. It's not a bad thing. Getting stuck at being stuck is the problem. That's what's negative. What's negative is fabricated stuck. Think of that. All negative thinking is just what you're making being stuck out of thin air. You're like, oh, I'm just stuck at this. I'm a victim because I was abused years ago. Yeah, you're a victim, by the way. I don't dispute that. But if there's a way that you're making that get you stuck on ideals that you want now, that makes no sense. Why should you not pursue or put resources into achieving your ideals just because you were abused when you were younger, right? Yes, you're a victim of the abuse. And yes, property rights violations are wrong. We want to eliminate them. But that's a good reason not to do it yourself, for example. Like, we're not here to rail against the world. We want to understand what's correct ourselves, and we'll naturally spread that to other people. So negative thinking, or if we try to do this, then we're just going to feel bad. If you say, I'm just going to feel bad if I do that, don't set your goals too high, because then when you fail, you'll feel bad. If someone says that, that's fabricating stuckness. That's negative thinking, because you're going to a point where you're stuck and stopping there. All negative thinking is assuming that being stuck is where the story is. That's it. It's positive to look at where you would be stuck if you didn't work through it, but they look similar on the surface to people, and that's where they get confused. Of course, yeah, you don't let your fear freeze you, of course. Tell that to the partner, which he does at high school. That's funny I'm sure that was about my son before. Oh, that it's easier. Oh, about you create the environment. Yeah. And more specifically, yeah, it's a little more appropriate when someone's older, although at any age, like, you want to make your mind feel like something's important rather than trying to learn something that doesn't feel important is a real uphill struggle. You probably want to address the feeling of importance. And remember, the same thing with any motivation, right? Motivation is not just for you consciously. Motivation is for your brain. They work in parallel, how you feel consciously motivated and your brain doing its form of motivation. They're in one sense different, but in practice, for practical purposes, they're about the same. You consciously feeling motivated and your brain being motivated in the way that you want it to be. Because you'll consciously feel motivated about what your brain feels like is important, which is what you want your brain to feel motivated. It's about priorities and resource management, right? Motivation. So you'll feel like something is motivating to you in parallel with your brain feeling like it's a priority, which means that your mind will learn things related to it naturally. Your brain literally can learn effortlessly. What the problem is determining what's important and communicating that and getting it to line up. But once again, as you think clearly and carry through scenarios regarding being stuck, then again, the motivation, including your learning, will all get it lined up properly. Everything gets streamlined. And again, the extreme practical result of my son, Chance, is crazy. Again, this is how extreme the actual results are of using this process. It's just extreme, right? What he can do is extreme. It's ridiculous. It's like a college major just to speak another language, and he can speak in pure gold in this webinar. Yeah, I agree. I never know. Exactly. Like last time, it was gold in the sense of the concepts, but how it came together. I I wouldn't say it was like pure gold, how it came together in terms of the presentation and so forth. I don't have an issue with that. It's just it comes together as it does. I learned from it, helps me notice things and so forth. But this webinar, I think, came together awesome in terms of kind of the clarity with the concepts and so forth. And Mike said, yeah, my annuity is right. I definitely got this annuity idea over to Mike and it changed his life forever. Another reason he's thankful. I appreciate that, Mike. And thank you for all the Mike did. And Mike recently got a house. Congratulations. Perfect dream house for himself. It's a great price for what he wanted and everything, or a great price range for himself and just what he wanted. And we worked at that. I appreciate that. He made a video about it. I didn't show it in this webinar, but maybe I'll post it somewhere. Megan said much more clarity on knowing how to get unstuck from observing emotional response. Doesn't look for what's not matching. Great. Yeah, I'm really this last webinar. And last webinar is so important. It also, the other thing about last webinar, and maybe it was just a time when we were growing a framework and growing like a sticky framework. And that's just not going to be as fun, like naturally in a lot of cases, although it could be. And maybe some of you just enjoyed it tremendously. I think going back, like it'll particularly be fun. Maybe I could do it even better and so forth, but it might have just been a symptom. But it's always fun. Once we did that last time, and it even created a sticky framework and growing for me to have the thoughts that I had for this one. Like we had to go through that one to get to this one in essence. Cognitive stimulation on the second. Wednesday. Okay, great. So he's skipping this week and next. Huge assimilation with Russell on the 9th. Okay, great. Russell Brunson. Okay, so that'll be great to get him. Okay, so if that's the case, I'll make sure of that, double check. But I presume that's the case for sure. And then that means I'll probably do it on Wednesday unless there's someone else doing something. Anyway, so look out for that. Okay, guys, awesome. We'll wrap it up here. And I appreciate you guys tremendously. What did Shema say? I have a study habit. When I study the videos in the members area to listen to a Webby and take notes while I listen, and a 1 hour Webby could take me 3 hours. I've tried to listen to a video the first time without taking notes, but I can't seem to do that. The result is taking me forever, it seems. Yeah, it applies totally. I think okay. So Shama basically described metaphorically when it came to studying. I dealt with this a lot in my 20s when I was teaching my accelerated learning. People would say, I just feel anxious and something's wrong if I don't get everything enough. And when they read a textbook chapter, and they would take endless notes and they just feel like they got to get closure. And it's doubly counterproductive, Shema. This is going to be exciting for you as you get this. When you take these incredibly detailed notes and all this stuff, when you're listening to a webinar the first time or reading a chapter, you both take a long time, which is alternative use. Your time could have been spent differently. And you give yourself all kinds of false closure, which feels satisfying. But I'm so glad you have this to illustrate. It feels right and it's exactly wrong, but everyone's like that. We all have this where we feel like we want the closure and it's constantly interfering with our goal achieving process because we want the feeling of progress right now. And instead we counteract the learning process because we feel like we got it. And that exactly is the opposite of what you want for your mind to actually encode something so you have it in your head rather than the notes. So you have it in the notes, your mind feels like it has it. And then it doesn't organize it in your mind so you can retrieve it. Instead, you want to look for a feeling, oh man, I don't have it. I'm not doing this right. You want to watch a webinar and then try to apply it. And then when you apply it, you're bumbling around. And that's like the fastest way to learn. You bumble around trying to rank a website, doing half the things wrong, not remembering what they said in the webinar. And then that's exactly the fastest way to learn because you develop a framework. By trying to rank the website, you see all the tangible things and things you notice. And you have this whole framework now and you listen to Greg the second time or whoever the second time, you can picture the website. You can picture how you tried to see this menu or do that. And now it all just makes sense. And you never would have had that happen unless you were in there trying to rank the website. And you feel competent, you feel like you're wrong, you don't know what you're doing. And then kids do that and they learn great. Exactly. And that's why I say stick with me. Remember, I was saying this for years. I'm just going to go I'm addressing so many common bottlenecks as we go through my training, alchemy and here, and different angles on it. But there's not like an unlimited amount of common bottlenecks, but this learning one and the way that I explained it today, it's going to eliminate such an issue that appears in so many different ways for you guys. But it just takes time to build a framework where I can say it in a way that you have the framework to really get it. And that's why my webinars, it's like a whole new webinar, often the fourth time you listen to it, is because the framework is built and built. And I'm saying stuff, and there's no way I could say it better or faster. Of course, that's not true, like ultimately, that I could say things, but there's this real limit on however I say it. Your framework has to get built and has to get sometimes built in multiple layers. And there's some things that you can't get them until you have the framework for what I say on the exact same webinar. But you build the framework by watching that webinar over and over sometimes. And I couldn't have given it to you until you built the framework. And the topic we're talking about, the world doesn't give you a framework. It gives you the opposite. We have to actually tear down the wrong framework, which gets in the way. And so it takes a while. That's when I'm spend so much focus convincing you something's counterintuitive. Why? Because until and unless you get and feel even that it's counterintuitive, but the feeling comes after you get it like intellectually in that state period. But you have to get to literally where your mind feels that something's counterintuitive. So it tears down its wrong framework, but it has to get to where it feels or where it gets what it'll give you the feeling for. That what you currently have is wrong. Until you see that, it doesn't matter if I tell you the right answer because it's going to get swamped out by the wrong framework. And so I need to do a lot with you guys when you have the wrong framework and I have to convince to convince your mind that it's wrong. Tear it down. Then you have to build the right one, but you have to build the growing initial part of it. And then you finally get and feel the right stuff. But it's a process. But we're talking about really critical stuff at the final box. So everyone has to do what we're doing in order to get unstuck. So it's wonderful and it's the right thing to do, but it's a process and you don't get the satisfying feeling necessarily right away. However, a lot of you guys are sticking with me tremendously, so we're all doing something right. You guys are seeking well and something's all going on. Paul, and I'll still wrap this up soon here. Paul says, so in the vein of motivation, bottlenecks, and building frameworks, I'm trying to figure out how to get through this. So here's what will happen. I'll know something is good for me. I do it, I enjoy it. I even do it for longer than what most people say it takes to develop a habit. And all of a sudden, it's like something will switch my brain and I cannot do what it is that I know I need to do. As an example, I love meditation. I feel motivated to do it. I used to do it every day for a couple of years. But for some reason, when I plan to do it, it feels like I'm banging my head against concrete if I do it. Yeah, okay. And you're saying your brain is sabotaging, but that's only a symptom. Don't worry about that. Don't focus there. I don't know how to get past it. It actively shows up when I'm trying to better myself and say, okay, here's what's going on is there's something I call the master key. And it has to do, and I'll double check to make sure that's in the 2017 area. I really need to make sure I put all my stuff in there now. I didn't put everything in there at once. I wouldn't overwhelm the heck out of people that join. Oh, and Justin backed up the thing that I talked about, a Shema that just popped in there. So I just wanted to check on that so it wasn't distracting me. But okay. So there's something I call the master key, and it has to do with norms and standards. And your motivation when your motivation goes away for something that you were previously motivated for and even seem to have the habit for, it's because your motivation came from keeping up with a standard rather than achieving an ideal, and that the opposite of doing what you're doing would get you stuck. So again, you do want to have your motivation come from having ideal. Goal can mean a lot of different things. So you want to figure out intellectually an ideal first, and then make your mind feel the ideal as a priority, as appropriate, specifically. Then you achieve the ideal by consciously making sure things that get you stuck, including running in circles, being on the wrong peak, and so forth. And I'll continue to illustrate about ways not to be stuck. The idea of the meta idea of not being stuck. I'll work on that with you guys in the future. At least you have the general concept now. Instead, people get motivated by norms and standards. These act like kind of super goals, pulling on your goals and creating your goals. And so when you're motivated to go after a particular woman or to go after exercise because of, say someone's motivated to exercise, it's because they either feel like there's a norm with their body being in shape, or there's another norm or standard that they're trying to keep up with. They're like, basically they want a relationship, and they feel in order to meet the standards of someone that, like a woman that they want, let's say if you're a guy and you're heterosexual, then in order to meet the standards of women in your head, you're thinking that you want to work out. Or there's something else that's making that standard feel front and center. What'll happen is that the conditions will change, or you'll hit the standard. Or this can happen with meditation. Let me illustrate it in a similar way. With, suppose a guy feels like he wants to get dating a woman where she's into him and commit to him. He'll achieve that. He'll hit that standard, and then he'll slack off and he won't do the things that he was doing to try to achieve it, because the mind feels like that standard was achieved. And then it will stop devoting resources to it like a priority, like it's done. So you'll feel done. And that comes from goals being relative. See, goals related to standards and norms are weak, and they're relative. And they're just relative on various levels. If you have an ideal, but the ideal isn't from outside of you. Your ideal is from thinking it through and correctly seeing how you want to. Remember, I've also talked about revealing goals rather than setting them. So goals get set from norms and standards, from wanting to, you feel like you want to achieve something. A goal all of a sudden seems important or relevant. This happens with dieting sometimes with people, or all these kind of self-improvement things. People feel like their life is substandard in some way, either with relationship or with their health, just directly, or whatever reason they feel like they want to up themselves, up their standard. They're below their standard. but then they get there and then they slack off. A real ideal that gets revealed through thinking accurately, and again, you think accurately by looking at the opposite and seeing what definitely at least doesn't match. And you might not know what the ideal is, but you know what it isn't. And so you want to hit the target of the gray. You want to get within the gray area. You don't want to be within the black area. So to speak. You don't want your weight or this to be a certain point, below a certain point. You don't want to, might not know how to ideally treat your significant other, but you know how not to ideally treat them. You know what definitely wouldn't work and you stay away from that. So when you think accurately and have your ideals reveal themselves through an accurate thinking process, which also means you're aware of how you'll get stuck in the opposite, then your goals aren't fragile, aren't relative and fragile and conditional. And you won't, it's not sabotage. It's the norms and standards thing, which I've explained to some degree here. This is interesting. It opens up a bit of a can of worms that I might expand on soon, very possibly in the next webinar. But that starts to give you a place to look. All right, guys. Wonderful. Appreciate you all. Terrific participation, terrific energy that I appreciate. Justin Ritter said, wow, tonight was David Mills Unleashed. What an experience. Well done, man. You're very welcome. Yeah, it really turned out great this time. I'm glad. You're so welcome, Ernie. Wow, such a nice thing. Thank you. And you're welcome, Bryce, and you're welcome, Janine, of course, and Scott, and Shema. Excellent, guys. But we get these rewarding webinars by sometimes, again, we can look for it. If a webinar seems like a little less satisfying, it's probably necessary. Again, not that I always know the exact thing to say, or that I couldn't have had a more ideal webinar on the more slightly off one, but sometimes it's just a matter of to grow the framework. But there's only one overall framework, and that's we talked about last time. So in a sense, it's all happily downhill from here. You are welcome, guys. All right, take care. And I'll see you next week. Take a look at the webinar schedule for the part next week. Very welcome back.